Hey there, tonight we're exploring a Christmas in medieval Paris, where the cheer of carolers met the chill of stone streets. Far from the fairy tale version, this season was wrapped in both warmth and wonder amidst frosty realities. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Medieval Paris at Christmas time, a place where the streets were dirtier than your average teenager's bedroom, yet somehow more magical than any Pinterest board could dare to dream. Now, let's set the scene. It's the 12th century, and the city is like a rugged patchwork quilt of bustling marketplaces, towering cathedrals, and streets filled with the kind of aroma that could be charitably described as medieval chic. Winter's chill hung in the air, and the Seine was more likely to freeze over than to inspire any romantic hacus. But that didn't stop Parisians from throwing themselves into Christmas with the fervor of a Black Friday sale at a medieval Walmart. Back then, Christmas wasn't just a holiday. It was an event, think Coachella, but with more incense and fewer flower crowns. It was a time when religious devotion and festive merrymaking waltzed together like an awkward couple at their first dance. The church played the role of both strict parent and enthusiastic party planner. On one hand, they wanted everyone to remember that Christmas was about the birth of Jesus, not just an excuse to gorge on roast goose. On the other, they understood that a little bit of merrymaking was essential to keep the peasants from revolting or worse, getting too philosophical about their lot in life. Gift-giving was already a thing, though, back then. You could forget about finding a Nintendo Switch under the tree, or even a tree, for that matter. If you were lucky, you'd get a new tunic or some nuts, which was the medieval equivalent of socks and a fruit basket. By the way, let's be clear. The only silent night back then was when the snow fell thick enough to muffle the sound of a passing cart. The origins of some of our beloved Christmas traditions can be traced back to these times. Take, for instance, the idea of a feast. In the 12th century, the average person consumed about 3,000 calories a day, and that number skyrocketed during Christmas. Picture tables groaning under the weight of roasted meats, pies, and mead, a smorgasbord that would make any modern dietitian weep. But let's not get too romantic. This was as much about survival as celebration. Winter was harsh, and a good feast was like storing up a little joy and fat to get you through the bleak months ahead. Even the church knew the value of a good shindig. Sure, priests would lecture on the virtues of moderation and piety, but they also understood that a little revelry kept the flock happy. After all, a joyous congregation was less likely to start questioning why they were tithing so much of their hard-earned coin. It's no coincidence that the church calendar was peppered with feast days. There was nothing like a bit of divine celebration to distract the masses from the everyday grind of medieval life. And speaking of distractions, let's not forget the street performers, those unsung heroes of medieval entertainment. They were the Netflix of their day, offering everything from juggling acts to morality plays. Sure, some of it was a bit lowbrow, but who doesn't love a good slapstick routine, especially when it involves someone getting hit with a pig bladder? These performances often had a moral undertone, a gentle reminder that while laughter was good, salvation was better. But hey, if you could get both at the same time, why not? Now, let's talk about the economic side of things. Christmas in medieval Paris was like a microeconomic experiment. Markets would swell with vendors peddling everything from spices to fabrics. The city was a hub of commerce, and during the festive season, it buzzed like a beehive. For the merchant class, this was prime time to make a killing, figuratively speaking, of course. And while the church frowned upon the crass commercialism of it all, they weren't exactly complaining about the increased tithes. And let's not overlook the role of the church in shaping the holiday. They were the ultimate influencers, determining not just how people worshipped, but also how they celebrated. Christmas was a time for masses and processions, and the grand cathedrals, Notre Dame being the most famous, were the epicenters of spiritual life. The architecture alone was a marvel. Imagine standing in a stone colossus, your breath visible in the cold air, as the choir's voices soared to the rafters. It was the kind of awe-inspiring experience that made you forget, if only for a moment, the mud under your boots and the perpetual threat of the plague. But let's not kid ourselves. For many, Christmas was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about blowing off some steam. The church knew this, and while they tried to steer the celebrations towards piety, they understood the value of a happy populace. After all, when people are singing carols and stuffing their faces, they are less likely to be questioning the divine right of kings or the fairness of the feudal system. So there you have it. A medieval Christmas in Paris was a complex tapestry of faith, festivity, and a fair bit of folly. It was a time when the sacred and the secular danced a delicate waltz, each borrowing a little from the other to create a holiday that was as much about joy as it was about devotion. And while the trappings may have changed over the centuries, the essence remains the same, a celebration of life, love, and the hope for brighter days ahead. Now, speaking of a delicate waltz, let's dance our way into the gritty, bustling marketplaces of medieval Paris. These were the lifeblood of the city, especially during Christmas, when the economic engine revved up like a medieval sports car, albeit one powered by oxen and human ambition. Picture a cacophony of sounds, the haggling of merchants, the clinking of coins, and the occasional shout of a pickpocket fleeing with someone's hard-earned denier. Markets back then were the medieval equivalent of Amazon, only instead of a click, it was all about the barter and banter. The goods on offer were a veritable feast for the senses. Spices from the east that had traveled farther than most Parisians ever would, fabrics so fine they could make a monk reconsider his vows, and meats that were either fresh or aged, a polite way of saying you might want to cook it thoroughly. The role of these markets was pivotal. They were the intersection where economic aspirations and festive preparations met, and boy, were they crowded. During the Christmas season, merchants saw their profits soar, as people flocked to stockpile goods for the upcoming feasts. And these were no ordinary feasts, mind you. Nobles would lay out spreads so lavish, they'd make a modern influencer's brunch look like a sad desk salad. But let's not get too carried away with the glamour. While the noble class was busy setting tables with more courses than a 4-year college degree, the common folk were doing their own version of holiday prep, albeit with a much tighter budget. The economic divide between the nobles and peasants was as wide as the Seine, and just as cold in winter. Nobles would import the finest wines and spices, servants scurrying about like the culinary version of Santa's elves, preparing dishes that could fill a cookbook. But for the average Parisian, the feast was a little less Game of Thrones banquet, and a little more please, sir, can I have some more? While the upper echelons indulged in swan and venison, peasants might be lucky to have a bit of pork or some fish if they lived close enough to a river. Even bread, the staple of life, was a marker of class. The wealthy munched on fine white loaves, while the poor had to settle for darker, coarser bread, more fiber, less fantastic. It's like the difference between a croissant and a slice of whole wheat, but with a lot more at stake. And let's talk about the real economics of these festivities. A noble's feast could cost the equivalent of what a peasant might earn in a year, and that's no exaggeration. In today's terms, imagine blowing your entire annual salary on a single holiday dinner. Bon appetit, indeed. Yet, such extravagance wasn't just about showing off wealth. It was also about reinforcing social hierarchies and alliances. An invitation to a feast wasn't just a chance to eat well. It was a political move, a social chess game played with knives and forks. Meanwhile, the peasants were pinching pennies, or rather, deniers, to make their meager celebrations as merry as possible. Homemade treats and small tokens of goodwill were the order of the day, and families often pooled resources to make the most of what they had. It was a reminder that while the trappings of Christmas might look different across the social spectrum, the spirit of community and togetherness was universal. Now, let's not forget the role of the church in all this economic merriment. While they preached about moderation and humility, they weren't exactly skipping the feasting themselves. Monasteries often held significant land and wealth, and their kitchens were nothing to sneer at. Monks might have taken vows of poverty, but during Christmas, those vows were stretched thinner than a monk's belt after the feast. The church also had a hand in regulating the markets, or at least trying to ensure that the faithful weren't getting ripped off. They set guidelines for fair pricing, though enforcement was about as reliable as a medieval weather forecast. Still, this attempt at oversight shows that even in the 12th century, There was a push and pull between commerce and ethics, a dance as old as time. And as the markets buzzed with activity, and the streets filled with the scent of roasting chestnuts and fresh bread, the social dynamics of the city became more pronounced. The rich and powerful flaunted their wealth, while the poor made do with what they had, often finding joy in the simple things. It was a microcosm of medieval life itself, where class and status were as much a part of the landscape as the cobblestones beneath your feet. So, while we might romanticize the notion of a medieval Christmas with its grand feasts and festive markets, it's crucial to remember the economic realities that played out beneath the tinsel and holly. For every roasted goose on a noble's table, there was a family scraping together a modest meal, proving that the spirit of Christmas, then as now, was as much about perseverance as it was about celebration. As we continue this medieval journey, let's keep peeling back the layers of this festive onion, revealing the complexities and contradictions that made Christmas in 12th century Paris a time of both splendor and struggle. And who knows, we might just discover that, despite the centuries and the changes, some things about this holiday haven't changed all that much. Stay tuned. Amidst the hustle and bustle of medieval Parisian markets, another crucial element of the social fabric emerged: community gatherings. These weren't just about exchanging pleasantries over a tankard of mead. They were the glue holding together a society that had more layers than a millefeuille. When winter's chill forced people indoors, gathering around a hearth wasn't just a cozy option. It was a survival strategy. And no, mistletoe wasn't just hanging around to facilitate awkward kisses. In fact, it played a role far more complex than any rom-com subplot could dream up. Mistletoe, with its waxy leaves and berries, was a symbol of peace and healing, dating back to the Druids long before it became a festive matchmaking tool. In a medieval setting, it was believed to ward off evil spirits, which, let's face it, were as ubiquitous as the smell of unwashed wool. Hanging mistletoe was a bit like medieval security software, keeping the bad vibes at bay while you focused on the holiday cheer. Plus, it was thought to bring good luck and fertility, making it the Swiss Army knife of holiday decorations. Community gatherings were the heart and soul of Christmas celebrations. Forget about solitary introspection. This was the time to be as social as a medieval Instagram influencer. Feasts were communal affairs, where everyone from the lord of the manor to the poorest serf might find themselves sharing a table. You see, the notion of medieval generosity wasn't entirely a myth, but it was more PR campaign than reality show. Lords would open their halls to the peasantry, not out of sheer benevolence, but as a strategic move to reinforce social bonds, and let's be honest, to avoid getting pitchforked. These gatherings were the medieval equivalent of networking events, only with more roast boar and fewer awkward business cards. The lord of the manor played the gracious host, offering food and drink to his vassals, ensuring their loyalty for another year. It was like an annual review, but with more mulled wine and fewer spreadsheets. This generosity was often a facade, with the subtext being, eat, drink, and remember who's in charge. Now, let's debunk the myth of medieval altruism. While the lords were playing Santa Claus, their motivations were often as transparent as a stained glass window. The idea of charity in medieval times was closely tied to religious duty. The church preached that giving to the poor was a way to ensure a comfy spot in heaven. A noble might distribute alms not just out of kindness, but as a spiritual insurance policy. In essence, they were hedging their bets in the afterlife, hoping a few loaves of bread would translate into celestial brownie points. Peasants, on the other hand, engaged in their own forms of mutual aid. Villages operated on a system of reciprocity, where helping your neighbor today meant they'd help you tomorrow. It wasn't just about goodwill, it was practical. When winter hit, pooling resources and labor was often the difference between thriving and merely surviving. The spirit of Christmas was less about grand gestures and more about community resilience. But let's not romanticize too much. These gatherings weren't all come-bear moments. Class divisions were stark, and while the lord's table might groan under the weight of roasted game and spiced wine, the peasant's share was often a humble affair. It's like being invited to a Michelin-star restaurant, but having to settle for the breadbasket. The disparity was as palpable as the cold December air. Yet, despite these inequities, these gatherings provided a rare sense of unity. For a brief moment, the rigid social hierarchy softened. People shared stories, laughter, and sometimes even a dance around the fire. It was a reminder that, beneath the layers of social and economic divides, there was a shared humanity. And while the lords and peasants might drift back to their separate worlds once the decorations came down, the memory of these gatherings lingered like the scent of pine in the air. So, while we might idealize the notion of a medieval Christmas as a time of universal goodwill and generosity, it's crucial to peel back the layers and see the pragmatism underpinning the festivities. The spirit of the season was as much about maintaining social order as it was about spreading cheer. And while the trappings of Christmas have evolved, the essence, a mix of community, survival, and a touch of strategic generosity, remains surprisingly familiar. As we inch closer to the finish line of this medieval holiday marathon, let's keep our eyes peeled for more surprises hidden beneath the tinsel and tradition. There's more to unearth about the dynamics of this ancient celebration, and who knows, we might just find that, in some ways, medieval Christmas has more in common with our modern celebrations than we'd care to admit. Stay tuned. And speaking of surprises, let's dive headfirst into the political intrigue simmering beneath the surface of medieval Christmas celebrations. Forget sugar plums. The real visions dancing in the heads of kings and nobles were alliances, power grabs, and the occasional scandalous affair. Yes, my friends, medieval politics was a Game of Thrones where the holiday season was just another battlefield. Take King Louis Roman VII of France, for example. This guy understood that the holiday season was prime time for political maneuvering. Christmas was a convenient excuse to gather lords and barons under one roof, all in the name of festive cheer. Picture a medieval office Christmas party, but instead of awkward secret Santas, you had land grants and marriage contracts being shuffled around like poker chips. In the 12th century, Christmas wasn't just about midnight mass and wassail bowls. It was a strategic opportunity. For the kings and nobility, it was like hitting the social reset button. You could mend fences, forge alliances, and if you played your cards right, emerge from the season with more power than you had going in. The stakes were high, and the rewards were sweeter than any figgy pudding. But let's not kid ourselves. These gatherings were less about goodwill and more about good strategy. The nobility used the season to host opulent feasts where the guest list was as carefully curated as an influencer's Instagram feed. Inviting the right people was crucial, and I'm not talking about the ones who bring the best cheese platter. We're talking about influential vassals, potential allies, and maybe even a rival or two. Because what's a party without a little tension? Marriage alliances were the piece de resistance of these gatherings. Picture this, a lavish Christmas feast, the hall decked in holly and ivy, and somewhere between the boar's head and the spiced wine, a young noblewoman is promised to a lord twice her age. Romantic, right, but these unions were less happily ever after, and more strategically advantageous. They were the medieval version of a corporate merger, designed to consolidate power, land, and influence. The church, ever the party crasher, had a role in these political machinations too. Bishops and clergy weren't just spiritual guides, they were key players in the political arena. Their blessing, or lack thereof, could make or break a royal marriage or alliance. Imagine a bishop as the ultimate gatekeeper, deciding who made it to heaven and who got a seat at the high table. Talk about power. And while we're on the subject of churchly influence, let's delve into the scandals that often accompanied these gatherings. Ah yes, the medieval equivalent of tabloid fodder. Affairs, betrayals, and even the odd poisoning attempt were all part of the Christmas repertoire. Behind the veneer of piety and celebration, there were enough secrets and scandals to fill a Netflix series. Take the infamous Henry Roman II and Elena of Aquitaine, for example. Their Christmas court was a hotbed of intrigue, with Elena's alleged plotting against her husband becoming the stuff of legend. This wasn't just a domestic spat. It had real political ramifications. Elena, a powerhouse in her own right, used the festive season to rally support among the nobility, turning what should have been a time of peace into a powder keg of tension. But let's not get too swept up in the drama without acknowledging the economic realities. Hosting these grand affairs wasn't cheap. A royal feast could drain a treasury faster than a medieval tax collector. According to records, an extravagant Christmas celebration could cost upwards of 1,000 livres, an astronomical sum when you consider that a skilled artisan might earn around 5 livres a year. It was a gamble, a high-stakes investment in political capital that could pay dividends or lead to ruin. Yet, despite the cost, the lure of political gain was irresistible. Nobles jockeyed for position, each maneuvering for that coveted spot closest to the king, both literally and figuratively. Proximity to power was everything, and the holidays were a chance to cement one's place in the social hierarchy. Of course, not everyone had a seat at the table. The common folk, ever the spectators in this grand game, were largely excluded from the political theatrics. For them, Christmas was a time of modest celebration and communal bonding, far removed from the machinations of the elite. But even they weren't completely immune to the ripple effects of political decisions made over the holiday season. So, while it might be tempting to romanticize medieval Christmas as a time of universal goodwill and cheer, remember the undercurrents of power and politics that swirled beneath the surface. For the nobility, it was a season of opportunity, a time to solidify alliances and strengthen their grip on power. And while the trappings of Christmas have evolved over the centuries, the essence of ambition and strategy remains as enduring as the holiday itself. As we stride towards the final act of our medieval saga, the layers of history continue to unravel, revealing a tapestry rich with intrigue, ambition, and the timeless dance of power. Stay with us as we explore the final chapter of this holiday tale, where the echoes of the past resonate with surprising clarity in the present. And so, as the holiday bells of medieval Paris echoed into the frosty night, they carried with them the whispers of power plays, economic maneuvers, and the social dynamics of a bygone era. But while the nobility plotted their next political chess move under the guise of festive cheer, it's fascinating to ponder how these traditions have morphed and lingered into our modern celebrations. Ah, yes, the ghosts of Christmas past are more persistent than a fruitcake left over from last year. Let's start with the obvious, the feast. The medieval Christmas table, groaning under the weight of roasted meats and spiced wines, has evolved into the modern-day holiday spread. Sure, we might swap the boar's head for a turkey and the mead for a mulled wine, but the essence remains. Take, for example, the calorie count. In the Middle Ages, a Christmas dinner could easily top 5,000 calories, a number that makes today's indulgence look like a modest appetizer. But the medieval feast wasn't just about overindulgence. It was a survival tactic, a way to insulate against the harsh winter months. Today, we feast as a form of nostalgia, a nod to our ancestors who celebrated with the same fervor, and let's be honest, gluttony. Now, let's tackle the myth of the medieval Christmas tree. Spoiler alert, it wasn't really a thing. The modern Christmas tree tradition sprouted roots in early modern Germany, not in the muddy streets of Paris. Back in the 12th century, decorating trees was about as common as finding a vegan option at a medieval feast. Instead, homes were adorned with evergreens and holly, symbols of life and resilience during the bleakest months. So, while you might think you're channeling your inner medieval peasant by decking the halls, you're actually more in line with 19th century German customs. Funny how traditions twist and turn like a holiday candy cane. And speaking of decorations, let's not forget about the role of mistletoe. Its current reputation as a facilitator of awkward holiday kisses belies its ancient significance. In medieval times, hanging mistletoe was less about stealing a smooch and more about warding off malevolent spirits. Today, it's a quirky bit of decor with roots in pagan rituals, a reminder that not all traditions are as innocent as they seem. On to the economic side of things, medieval markets were bustling hubs of activity, and while Black Friday deals weren't exactly a thing, the festive season was a crucial time for commerce. Merchants seized the opportunity to sell wares to a captive audience, a practice that hasn't changed much. Fast forward nearly a millennium, and you'll find that the commercial aspect of Christmas is alive and well. Today's holiday shopping frenzy is the direct descendant of those bustling medieval markets, albeit with fewer pickpockets and more digital receipts. It seems capitalism found its footing long before the age of Amazon Prime. But let's not gloss over the darker sides of these traditions. The economic divide between the haves and have-nots was as stark then as it is now. For every nobleman feasting in splendor, there were countless peasants making do with far less. While modern Christmas has its fair share of excess, it's also a time for reflection, charity, and community, an echo of the medieval practice of almsgiving, albeit with more emphasis on genuine goodwill than on securing a spot in the heavenly choir. And what about the politics? The medieval holiday season was as much about political strategy as it was about merriment, a fact that resonates with today's world leaders who often use the season for diplomatic gatherings and public appearances. While the stakes may not involve marriage alliances or land grants, the art of political maneuvering during the holidays persists. It's a reminder that while the trappings of power have changed, the essence of human ambition remains stubbornly consistent. The Church's influence over medieval Christmas can't be understated, and its legacy is still felt today. Midnight Mass, carol services, and nativity plays have their roots in the medieval Church's efforts to steer the holiday spirit towards piety and reverence. Despite centuries of secularization, the spiritual aspect of Christmas endures, offering moments of reflection amidst the chaos of holiday preparations. Now, as we unravel the threads of history, let's not forget how these medieval customs have woven themselves into the tapestry of modern Christmas. The tradition of giving, whether it's a humble gift or a grand gesture, has endured, a testament to the human desire to connect and spread joy. The sense of community, born from necessity in the harsh medieval winters, continues to thrive, albeit in more digital forms, as we reach out to loved ones across the globe. And so, as we wrap up this journey through the frosted streets of medieval Paris, it becomes clear that while the surface details of Christmas have evolved, the core remains unchanged. It's a celebration of light in the darkness, a reminder of our shared humanity, and a testament to the enduring power of tradition. Whether you find yourself gathered around a feast, exchanging gifts, or simply enjoying the quiet moments of reflection, remember that you're participating in a legacy that stretches back centuries, a dance between past and present, a testament to the timeless nature of the holiday season. In the end, perhaps the most significant legacy of medieval Christmas is its ability to adapt and endure. While the world has changed dramatically since the days of kings and cathedrals, the festive spirit remains a constant, a beacon of warmth and joy in the coldest months. So as you hang your ornaments and light your candles, take a moment to appreciate the rich tapestry of history that shapes our celebrations today. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, there's a little bit of medieval magic left in the air. You shake off sleep as the morning sun peeks over the thatched roofs of your village in Goryeo, Korea, right around the 11th century when metal was king, and blacksmiths were its royal courtiers. You're not just any villager, though. Today, you're stepping into the leather sandals of a blacksmith, the unsung hero of the medieval economy. As you stretch, the air is thick with the scent of soot and ambition, a potent combination that fuels the day's work. Your forge is more than a workplace. It's the beating heart of the community. Without you, fields would be unplowed, warriors would be unarmed, and the kingdom's fortunes might just falter. But let's not romanticize too quickly. Sure, blacksmithing sounds like a noble calling, but it's no walk in a meticulously manicured palace garden. It's a grind, literally and metaphorically. Your day begins not with a leisurely breakfast, but with a deep breath as you contemplate the mountain of raw iron waiting to be transformed into tools and weapons. These aren't just any hunks of metal. They are the future scythes, plows, and swords of Korea. In an era where agriculture and warfare drive the economy, the demand for your services is as constant as the rising sun. Now, here's a kicker. The economic engine of Goryeo relies heavily on metal goods, yet the cost of production is enough to make even the most stoic blacksmith raise an eyebrow. Iron isn't cheap, and neither is the charcoal needed to keep your forge blazing. A single ton of high-quality iron can set you back several bolts of silk, or about 20 to 30 pounds of rice, no small expense in a subsistence economy. You're essentially juggling a budget tighter than a royal decree, constantly balancing between acquiring raw materials and ensuring there's enough food on the table. As you fire up the forge, the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil echoes through the village, a sound as familiar as the crowing of roosters. It's a symphony of industry, and you're the conductor. Your work not only outfits the farmers and soldiers, but also supports the local economy. The village market depends on the durability of your tools, and every blade you temper could one day turn the tide of a battle. It's heady stuff, if you pause to think about it, which you rarely do because there's always more iron to work. Of course, you're not working in isolation. In Goryeo, the blacksmith's role is a linchpin in a web of social and economic relationships. You might be swapping iron tools for foodstuffs with the local farmer or bartering with the merchant who supplies your charcoal. This interconnectedness is your lifeline, and it's the grease that keeps the wheels of daily life turning. But it also means you're never far from the gossip and intrigues that swirl around the village like the embers from your forge. And let's not forget the political backdrop. You're living in a time when the Goryeo dynasty is consolidating its power, and every decision made by the court can send ripples through your daily routine. Royal decrees can change the demand for certain weapons, alter trade routes, or introduce new taxes, each with the power to upend your carefully balanced economic scales. You're not just a craftsman, you're a player in a larger political drama, albeit one who prefers to stay out of the limelight. Your day is punctuated by visits from neighbors and patrons, each with their own requests and demands. A farmer might need a new plowshare. A young warrior might be commissioning a sword that will hopefully see more practice than battle. Each piece you craft is a testament to your skill and a gamble on the future. Will that plowshare survive the rocky fields? Will that sword remain sharp in the chaos of combat? Your reputation rides on every item, and in a society where word of mouth is king, reputation is everything. As the sun climbs higher, so does the temperature in your forge. Sweat streams down your face, mingling with the soot that seems to permanently stain your skin. It's a dirty, grueling job, and yet there's a certain satisfaction in watching raw metal bend to your will. There's power in creation, and you wield it with every strike of your hammer. By midday, you've made a dent in the orders, but there's still a pile of work demanding attention. You pause for a meal, a simple affair likely consisting of rice, maybe some pickled vegetables, and if you're lucky, a bit of fish. It's sustenance, not indulgence, and you wolf it down without ceremony. Time is a luxury you can't afford when there's metal to be shaped and bills to be paid. As the day drags on, you can't help but think about the future, your village's future, and the future of the Goryeo kingdom. Metalwork is crucial, but it's also a constant reminder of the precariousness of life. The very tools and weapons you create are instruments of survival and destruction. It's a balance as delicate as the molten metal you forge, a balance between creation and destruction, between the prosperity of peace and the demands of warfare. Evening approaches, and the glow from the forge turns from a harsh blaze to a comforting ember. The clang of metal on metal winds down, leaving a ringing in your ears that seems to echo the day's labors. As you close up shop, you reflect on the day, the challenges faced, and the small victories achieved. It's a tough life, no doubt about it, but it's one that keeps the heart of the village, and by extension the kingdom, beating. So as you wind down, remember, you're not just a craftsman, you're a cornerstone of society, a vital cog in the machinery of history. And as you lay your head down to rest, soot-stained and weary, you know that tomorrow will bring the same challenges, the same demands, and the same rewards. But for now, the forge is quiet, and you can finally escape the clamor of the day and drift into the soft embrace of sleep. In the stillness of the night, your mind wanders back to the forge. You dream not of heroic deeds or epic battles, but of iron bars and the rhythmic dance of hammer and anvil. Before you know it, the dawn's light nudges you awake, and it's time to dive back into the heat of the day. A day that promises hard work, and hopefully a bit of enlightenment about the mystery that is blacksmithing in ancient Korea. As the morning sun calls you to action, you find yourself at the heart of an age-old process, iron smelting. Now, this isn't just about heating metal until it's pliable. Oh no, you've got to coax the iron out of its rocky slumber, separating it from that pesky gang, basically the dirt and rock partying in the ore. This isn't child's play. It's akin to trying to sort out the good apples from the bad in a barrel full of rot. You're not just a blacksmith. You're a metallurgical maestro, conducting an orchestra of elements in a symphony of transformation. Let's dig into some specifics here. You're working with a bloomery, a furnace that's the medieval equivalent of a heart yoga studio, but for iron ore. Temperatures inside this bad boy reach a blistering 200 degrees Celsius. That's around 192 degrees Fahrenheit for those keeping score at home. It's here that the magic, or rather the science, happens. The iron ore mixed with carbon-rich charcoal undergoes a chemical change, producing a spongy mass called a bloom. This isn't a delicate flower, it's a hefty lump of wrought iron, and it's your job to hammer it into something useful. Now, let's talk charcoal, your trusty sidekick in this metal-bending saga. In Goryeo, Korea, wood is plentiful, but it doesn't just fall into your lap. Turning trees into charcoal is labor-intensive business, and it's another line item on your ever-growing expense list. Charcoal production is practically an industry in itself, with entire families dedicated to its creation. It's a good reminder that, in this age, nothing is truly self-sufficient. Every task is a cog in the greater machine of society. Speaking of cogs, let's not forget the political machinery in play. The Goryeo dynasty's hunger for power means a perpetual demand for weapons. It's a time of military innovation, with the royal court often breathing down your neck, demanding more swords, more armor, more everything to outfit their armies. It's a high-stakes game where your craftsmanship could very well decide the fate of a skirmish or an entire battle. No pressure, right? And here's where the romance of the blacksmith artist myth starts to unravel. Sure, creating a perfectly tempered blade sounds artistic, but it's more sweat than Michelangelo. Each sword is a slog through repetitive, back-breaking labor. You're not a solo artist crafting a masterpiece in solitude. You're a craftsman, sometimes with a team, each person pounding away at the metal, trying to meet the quota. There's a certain artistry, yes, but it's less about inspiration and more about precision and endurance. Let's zoom out and talk about the trade of metals. Iron doesn't grow on trees, or anywhere nearby, really. The best iron ore is imported from distant regions, sometimes coming from as far as modern-day China or Japan. This means trade routes bustling with merchants and traders, each journey fraught with its own set of dangers and economic challenges. It's a vivid reminder that behind every sword and plough is a network of human effort spanning miles and cultures. The distances traveled for these materials aren't just numbers. They are stories of endurance and ambition. Caravans cross mountains and rivers, navigating political borders and dealing with the whims of nature. Each shipment is a gamble, and the stakes are high. If the caravan's delayed, your forge sits cold, and your stomach growls emptily. That's the harsh reality behind the gleaming iron goods so prized by the kingdom. Amid all this, there's an economic reality that can't be ignored. Iron's more than just a resource, it's currency. In a barter system, your iron goods are exchanged for grain, livestock, or services. But these aren't just random trades. They're influenced by the political winds. If the kingdom wages war, swords become more valuable than scythes. If there's peace, agricultural tools reign supreme. Your livelihood swings in the balance of these larger forces, and you're constantly adjusting your work to keep pace with the kingdom's demands. But let's not paint too grim a picture. There's a certain satisfaction in shaping raw metal into something that'll last generations. That sword you hammer out today might be the one that saves a warrior tomorrow. The plowshare you craft could be the very tool that feeds a family for years. It's a testament to the enduring power of your craft, even if it's all wrapped up in calloused hands and sooty faces. As the day presses on, the clang of metal on metal becomes a rhythm that pulses through the village. It's the heartbeat of progress, each strike a reminder of the laborious path from ore to tool. You're not just a blacksmith, you're a fulcrum balancing the needs of a burgeoning kingdom and the practical realities of your own survival. So, as you stand before your forge, sweat mingling with the soot on your skin, remember this: you're not just bending metal. You're shaping history, one heated, hammered, and honed piece at a time. And while the life of a blacksmith is far from the romanticized tales that might one day be spun, it's rich with the kind of grit and resilience that only comes from living at the intersection of artistry and labor. But let's pull back the curtain a bit on this gritty, rhythmic dance of hammer and anvil. Because while it might be tempting to get swept up in the romance of the noble blacksmith, the reality is less poetic and more, well, political. In ancient Korea, blacksmiths weren't just artisans forging metal. They were navigating a complex social landscape where status and roles were as rigid as the iron they worked with. You see, we're in Goryeo, Korea, where the social hierarchy was as finely layered as a milfoil pastry, but less buttery and more bureaucratic. At the top, you had the royals and the yangban, the aristocratic officials who probably never dirtied their hands with anything heavier than a calligraphy brush. Blacksmiths, on the other hand, were nestled in a lower rung of the societal ladder, part of the Chunmin class. These were the commoners, the ones who kept the kingdom running while the elite were busy contemplating the complexities of Confucian philosophy over tea. And here's a kicker for you. Despite their vital contributions, blacksmiths were often seen as little more than manual laborers. Forget the Hollywood image of a lone craftsman heroically forging Excalibur in a single blow. In reality, the blacksmith's life was a grind, and not the glamorous kind. They were part of a tightly controlled caste system, often working under the watchful eye of government officials who dictated everything from production quotas to the types of items they could craft. Now, if you're picturing a blacksmith as a free-spirited artist following their muse, think again. The government kept a tight lid on metal production, and for a good reason. Metal equaled power, and power was something the ruling class liked to keep a firm grip on. Blacksmiths weren't just making swords for the local warrior's personal collection. They were producing the hardware that could arm a revolution or crush one. The kingdom couldn't afford to have just anyone banging out blades, so they kept their blacksmiths on a short leash. But let's not forget the common folk, the very people whose livelihoods depended on the blacksmith's craft. To them, blacksmiths were indispensable. Farmers needed plowshares to till their fields. Soldiers required swords to defend their lands. Even the local merchant needed sturdy iron nails to build their stalls. In a world where survival often hung by a thread or a hammer stroke, blacksmiths were the unsung heroes, quietly holding the kingdom together one tool at a time. Yet, for all their importance, blacksmiths didn't enjoy the prestige one might expect. There were no parades in their honor, no songs sung about their daily toil. Instead, they lived in the shadow of the higher classes, their contributions recognized but rarely celebrated. It was a life defined by hard work and humble rewards, a stark contrast to the high-minded ideals of the ruling elite. And here's where the myth of the noble craftsman starts to crumble. In reality, blacksmiths weren't crafting weapons and tools for glory or fame. They were doing it to survive, to feed their families, and to keep the fires of their forges and their bellies burning. It was a job, plain and simple, and one that was as grueling as it was vital. So why, you might ask, did blacksmiths continue to toil away under such conditions? Partly out of necessity, sure, but also because, despite the back-breaking labor and societal snubs, there was a certain pride in their craft. They knew that without their work, the machinery of society would grind to a halt. They might not have been the ones making grand decisions or leading troops into battle, but they were the ones ensuring those decisions could be carried out, and those troops had swords to wield. And that's the paradox of the blacksmith's life in ancient Korea, a crucial yet often overlooked role, caught between the romanticized vision of the noble artisan and the harsh reality of societal constraints. It's a testament to the resilience of human spirit and ingenuity that even under the weight of caste and class, blacksmiths continue to forge not just metal, but the very backbone of their communities. As the midday sun crept overhead, casting long shadows across the village, the blacksmiths of Goryeo, Korea could take a moment to pause, to wipe the sweat from their brows, and to reflect on their place in the grand tapestry of history. They might not have been the ones writing the stories, but they were the ones ensuring the ink flowed and the pages turned. And in a world where power was often defined by the sharpness of a blade, the blacksmith's role was as crucial as it was complex. A blend of artistry and labor, necessity and survival, history and legacy. So, next time you hear the clang of hammer on anvil, remember, it's not just metal being shaped, but history itself, forged in the fires of a society that valued hard work above all else, even if it didn't always show it. And while the blacksmiths of ancient Korea might not have been the ones to receive the accolades, they were the ones who ensured that the kingdom could stand tall, armed, and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. And speaking of history being forged in the fires, let's dive into the afternoon of our blacksmith's day, where we hit the technological jackpot of ancient Korean blacksmithing. Because, believe it or not, these guys weren't just hammering out basic tools and weapons. They were the medieval equivalent of tech startups, churning out innovations that would make even Silicon Valley nod approvingly. First off, let's talk Celadon swords. If you're picturing a sword that doubles as a dinner plate, you might want to rethink your understanding of Celadon. In reality, these swords were as much a work of art as they were a tool of war. The name, Celadon, refers to the greenish glaze that mimicked the look of jade, highly prized in East Asian cultures. We're talking about swords that not only sliced through the enemy, but also added a touch of class to the battlefield. Imagine gifting one of these at a royal wedding. Talk about cutting edge. These celadon swords weren't just a fashion statement. They were a marvel of engineering. The Korean blacksmiths mastered the art of pattern welding, a technique where different types of iron were fused together to create a blade that was both strong and flexible. Kind of like making a sandwich, but with layers of iron instead of cold cuts. The result was a sword that could withstand the rigors of combat without snapping like a breadstick. Now, let's not get carried away with the romance here. These swords weren't the Excalibur of Korea, waiting for some chosen one to wield them. They were practical tools of war, crafted out of necessity and honed for effectiveness. Yet their creation was no small feat. It required skill, precision, and a hefty dose of trial and error. Picture a blacksmith sweating over a hot forge, meticulously layering iron, each strike of the hammer echoing with the hopes of a kingdom. Sounds poetic, doesn't it? But let's keep it real. Behind the poetry was a lot of grunt work and a bit of luck. These technological strides did more than just arm the Goryeo warriors. They turned the tides of warfare. Superior weaponry meant that Korean forces could hold their own against formidable foes, like the Khitan and Jurchen tribes. It wasn't just about having a sharper sword. It was about striking fear and awe into the hearts of your enemies. And that's where the celadon swords excelled. They were as much a psychological weapon as a physical one. But our blacksmiths weren't just innovators in warfare. They were also pivotal players in trade. The demand for their high-quality metal goods extended beyond Korea's borders. Their swords, tools, and other metalwork became hot commodities in markets as far away as China and Japan. We're talking about a trade network stretching over hundreds of miles, with Korean iron often serving as the backbone of regional commerce. And let's not forget the economic ripple effect here. The production of these advanced metal goods wasn't just a boon for the blacksmith. It supported entire industries. The demand for raw materials like iron ore and charcoal kept miners and woodcutters busy. And as Korean goods made their way across the seas, they opened the door for cultural exchanges and diplomatic ties that would shape the region for centuries. But with every great innovation comes a flurry of myths and legends, and Korean blacksmithing is no exception. Take the tale of the legendary swordsmith, a figure shrouded in mystery and myth, rumored to have imbued his blades with magical properties. It's a captivating story, the kind that makes you want to believe in enchanted swords and heroic quests. Yet, the reality is far less fantastical. The magic was simply the result of advanced metallurgy and a keen understanding of materials, no sorcery required. Still, these legends served a purpose. They added a layer of mystique to the blacksmith's trade, elevating the status of their work and capturing the imagination of those who wielded their creations. After all, who wouldn't feel a little braver with a magical sword in hand, even if the magic was more marketing than mystical? So, as the afternoon sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the forge, we find ourselves at the heart of a story that blends innovation with tradition, reality with legend. Korean blacksmiths, with their unyielding dedication and ingenuity, crafted more than metal. They forged a legacy that would echo through the ages. They were the unsung heroes, the silent architects of a kingdom's power, and the keepers of a craft that was as much about survival as it was about skill. And while the legend of the noble blacksmith might be more fiction than fact, the impact of their work is undeniable. They took raw metal and, through sheer will and expertise, transformed it into something extraordinary. It's a reminder that sometimes the true magic lies not in the stories we tell, but in the hands of those who shape history, one hammer strike at a time. As the sun sets on our ancient Korean blacksmith's day, we find ourselves at a crossroads where the clang of the anvil echoes into the future. The legacy of these iron-wielding artisans is not just a pile of rusty swords and tools. It's a story that stretches across centuries, weaving its way into the fabric of modern craftsmanship. So, let's unravel this tale of transition, where tradition meets innovation, and ancient techniques forge a path into the contemporary world. Now, if you're imagining that blacksmithing simply faded away like a forgotten art, think again. Instead, it evolved, like a metal phoenix rising from the ashes of its own forge. As Korea moved through the Joseon dynasty and into the modern era, the blacksmith's role shifted, but the essence of their craft remained as vital as ever. The 15th century saw the introduction of new metallurgical techniques, like the use of bellows to control airflow in the forge, which allowed for higher temperatures and, consequently, stronger metals. This wasn't just an upgrade, it was a game changer. Suddenly, the tools and weapons that had once been painstakingly crafted by hand could be produced more efficiently, setting the stage for Korea's industrial advancements. Fast forward to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and you'll find Korea caught in the throes of modernization. With the influx of Western technology and industrial methods, blacksmithing had to adapt or face obsolescence. The introduction of mechanized production lines didn't just change the game, it flipped the board. Yet, rather than being cast aside, traditional blacksmiths became the master craftsmen who trained the next generation in the art of metalwork, blending time-honored techniques with cutting-edge technology. It's here that we see the blacksmith's legacy transform into something broader, an influence on modern metalwork that extends beyond the confines of Korea. Take, for instance, the renowned Korean metalwork technique of damascening, a decorative art that involves inlaying different metals into one another to create intricate patterns. This technique, which requires the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a saint, found its way into luxury goods and beyond, showcasing the blacksmith's enduring impact on aesthetics and design. And let's not forget the economic implications. While the romanticized notion of the blacksmith as a solitary figure hammering away in a dimly lit workshop holds a certain charm, the reality was far more interconnected. Blacksmithing was an economic powerhouse, fueling industries from agriculture to warfare. The tools and weapons crafted in ancient Korea were exported across Asia, creating trade networks that contributed to the region's prosperity. Even today, Korea's robust manufacturing sector owes a nod to those early metalworkers who laid the groundwork. Of course, as we peel back the layers of history, we uncover the myths that have persisted alongside the facts. The image of the blacksmith as a mystical figure, capable of forging swords imbued with supernatural powers, is a narrative that continues to captivate imaginations. While it's tempting to get swept up in these tales of enchantment, the truth is often more grounded. The magic of the blacksmith was rooted in their expertise and innovation, not in the mystical properties of their creations. But isn't there something magical in that? The idea that through sheer skill and determination, a blacksmith could transform a lump of ore into a tool that could change the course of history is a testament to human ingenuity. It's a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary feats are achieved not through magic, but through hard work and perseverance. As we draw the narrative thread from ancient Korea to the present, it's clear that the legacy of blacksmithing is more than just a historical footnote. It's a testament to the enduring spirit of craftsmanship, a bridge between the past and the future. Today, you can find echoes of these ancient techniques in modern Korean metalwork, from the sleek lines of contemporary architecture to the precision engineering of technology. The legacy of the blacksmith lives on, not just in the tools and weapons they crafted, but in the very DNA of Korean industry and culture. So, as you close your eyes and let the day's lessons settle like the embers of a dying forge, remember this. The story of blacksmithing in Korea is not just about the past. It's a narrative that continues to shape the present and inspire the future. It's a story of transformation, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of excellence, a legacy forged in the fires of history and carried forward by the hands of those who dare to dream and create. And as you drift into the gentle embrace of sleep, let the rhythm of the hammer and anvil lull you into a world where tradition meets innovation, where the past informs the present, and where the legacy of the blacksmith endures in every piece of metal that bears the mark of their craft. Because in the end, the true magic lies not in the myths we tell, but in the stories we continue to shape with our own hands. In the beginning, there was nothing but a vast, cosmic abyss called Ginnungagap, which sounds like something you'd yell if you stubbed your toe in the dark. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill nothingness, though. This was the kind of nothing that was so profound, it actually gave birth to something. And just like that, Norse mythology kicks off with a bang, or maybe more of a cosmic whisper. On one side of this yawning void was Niflheim, a realm so cold it made the North Pole look like a tropical paradise. We're talking about a place where frost giants chill out, literally, and where ice and mist swirl in a never-ending dance of cold. On the opposite end was Muspelheim, a fiery realm harder than a summer in Death Valley, and home to fire giants who probably didn't need central heating. The clash of these two extreme environments in the middle of Ginnungagap created the first giant, Ymir. Now, if you're picturing a jolly, bearded giant, think again. Ymir was more like an amorphous blob, something straight out of a cosmic horror story. He wasn't alone for long, though. Thanks to his sweat. Yes, you heard that right. More giants started sprouting like mushrooms after rain. Giants from perspiration, a true testament to the weird and wonderful fertility of Norse imagination. But Ymir wasn't the only cosmic oddity born from this frosty furnace tango. Enter Ordhumla, a giant cow, because why not? Her claim to fame was licking salty ice blocks, which sounds like a strange hobby until you realize she was licking Beri, the first of the Aesir gods, into existence. Who knew dairy could be so divine? Beri fathered a son, Bor, who in turn fathered 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Vi. These guys weren't content with just hanging out in Ginnungagap, so they took a cue from the violent efficiency of Viking raids and decided to kill Ymir, using his body to construct the universe. It was like an epic DIY project with a side of fratricide. So what does this tell us about the Norse worldview? These creation myths weren't just bedtime stories spun around the fire to send little Vikings off to dreamland. They were a cosmic explanation for the chaotic and often harsh world the Norse people inhabited. When you live in a place where winter can last 6 months and food is about as plentiful as calm seas during a storm, it makes sense that your universe starts with a bloody, frost and fire-fueled origin story. Plus, it wasn't just about explaining where the world came from. It was about setting the stage for the epic tales of gods and giants that would follow, tales that would give the Norse a way to understand the forces of nature they couldn't control. Now, before you start thinking these myths are just grim tales of doom and gloom, there's a certain charm to them. Much like our modern love for sci-fi and fantasy, the Norse myths provided an escape and a way to grapple with life's big questions. They offered answers, however bizarre, to the mysteries of life, death, and everything in between. It's not a huge leap from Ymir's dripping sweat-spawning giants to today's fascination with alternate universes and multiverses in popular culture. Humans across time have been fascinated by the fantastical, the what-ifs, and the why-nots. And let's not forget the practical side of things. These myths also held the social and moral fabric of Norse society together. They were stories that taught lessons, explained traditions, and upheld the values of courage, honor, and resilience, qualities that were as vital in the Viking Age as they are today, albeit with less pillaging involved. The myths were a way to make sense of a chaotic world, where the gods themselves were just as flawed and unpredictable as the humans who worshipped them. It was a world where a giant cow could be as pivotal as a god, and that, my friends, is a universe worth staying awake for. So there you have it, the Norse cosmos, born from a void and built on a giant's corpse, with a divine cow licking gods into reality. These stories were not just the stuff of ancient fantasy, but a way for the Norse to navigate the treacherous waters of their existence, both literally and metaphorically. And while they might seem far-fetched, they reflect the human penchant for crafting narratives that help us deal with the inexplicable, the uncontrollable, and the downright bizarre. As we continue to unravel these myths, keep in mind that behind every giant and god is a story about what it means to be human, with all the glorious mess that entails. Speaking of glorious messes, let's dive into the Norse pantheon, where the gods were anything but paragons of perfection. Meet Odin, the All-Father, but don't let the title fool you into thinking he was some benevolent, omnipotent figure. Odin was more like a cosmic CEO with a penchant for disguise and espionage. He was wise, sure, but his wisdom often came from some morally grey methods. Take his pursuit of knowledge, for example. Odin sacrificed an eye at Mimir's well to gain insight, a move that proves you don't just get wisdom by reading self-help books. No pain, no gain, right? And let's not forget his knack for poetry, or rather, his knack for stealing it. Legend says Odin swiped the mead of poetry from the giants, showing that even gods aren't above a little creative kleptomania. Then there's Thor, everyone's favorite hammer-wielding deity who's not just about brawn, though he had plenty of it. With a hammer named Mjolnir, Thor was more enforcer than diplomat. His role wasn't just to bring the thunder, but to keep those pesky frost giants in check. Imagine him as the cosmic bouncer, ensuring that divine order was maintained. But Thor's adventures weren't all about smashing things to smithereens. There was a social message embedded in his tales, the need for balance and the protection of humanity. In a world where natural disasters could wipe out a village, a god who controlled the weather and enforced order was more than just a hero. He was a necessity. And then there's Loki, the trickster god who makes every family reunion awkward. Loki is the kind of character who'd RSVP to a wedding just to spike the punch. He's the embodiment of chaos, and his antics often left the gods in a bind. But Loki wasn't just there for comic relief. He served a crucial purpose. His actions, while often destructive, pushed the narrative forward and forced the gods to adapt. It's like that saying, chaos breeds creativity. Loki's shenanigans were a constant reminder that the universe was unpredictable and that even gods had to stay on their toes. Now, these gods weren't just sitting around in Valhalla sipping mead. They squabbled, bickered, and made questionable decisions that would put any soap opera plot to shame. Take the infamous story of the building of Asgard's walls. The gods hired a giant to construct them, but when it was time to pay up, they realized they'd promised the giant the sun, moon, and Freyja, kind of like handing over the keys to the kingdom. Enter Loki, who transformed into a mare to distract the giant's horse, ultimately saving the day, but birthing an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir in the process. Talk about a bizarre family tree. These tales weren't just for entertainment. They carried social and political messages relevant to the Norse. Odin's relentless pursuit of knowledge reflected the value of wisdom and cunning, crucial traits for survival in a harsh environment. Thor's hammering wasn't just a display of strength, but a symbol of the need for protection and stability in a world where chaos was ever present. Loki's antics, while disruptive, reminded the Norse of life's unpredictability and the importance of adaptability. But let's not get too starry-eyed about these divine dramas. These myths also reveal the gritty realities of Norse life. The gods' flaws and conflicts mirrored the human condition, reflecting a society that had to navigate its own disputes and power struggles. Odin's eye for knowledge and Thor's hammer for order were metaphors for the Norse reliance on wisdom and strength to maintain their world. Loki's chaos was a nod to the unpredictability of life, reminding people that no matter how much they planned, fate had a way of throwing curveballs. In the end, the Norse pantheon was a reflection of the human experience, with all its contradictions and complexities. These gods weren't distant, infallible beings, but flawed, relatable characters who embodied the struggles and triumphs of their worshippers. The myths served as a guide, offering both cautionary tales and aspirational narratives that helped the Norse make sense of their world. They were a reminder that life, much like the gods themselves, was a blend of order and chaos, wisdom and folly, strength and vulnerability. And while these tales might seem far removed from our modern lives, they continue to resonate, offering lessons in resilience and adaptability that are as relevant today as they were a millennium ago. So next time you find yourself in a pickle, remember the Norse gods. Sometimes the best way forward is a mix of Odin's wisdom, Thor's strength, and a touch of Loki's mischief. After all, life is a saga, and it's up to us to navigate it with a bit of divine inspiration and a whole lot of human ingenuity. Now that we've got Odin's wisdom, Thor's might, and Loki's mischief under our belts, let's take a jaunt through the 9 realms. Think of it as a grand tour of the Norse cosmos, minus the overpriced tickets and dodgy tour guides. First stop, Niflheim, a place so cold it could give you frostbite just thinking about it. Picture it as the ultimate winter wonderland, if that wonderland was more horror story than holiday brochure. In this realm, the frost giants hang out like it's eternal January, making even the bleakest Scandinavian winters seem balmy. It's easy to romanticize these icy expanses, but let's not forget the reality. The Norse lived in a world where survival often hinged on a precarious balance of resourcefulness and resilience. Next, we slide into Muspelheim, the fiery antithesis of Niflheim. Muspelheim is the cosmic equivalent of a perpetual BBQ, complete with fire giants who probably use lava as tanning oil. And while it sounds like the perfect vacation spot for a fire-loving Viking, the truth is, the Norse knew a thing or two about fire hazards. Their longhouses, constructed from timber and turf, were cozy yet flammable, making fire both a friend and a foe. It was a world where the warmth of a hearth was as vital as the food it cooked, yet the threat of a blaze was a constant spectre. Now, these realms were more than just fantastical constructs. They mirrored the extremes of the Norse environment, where life was a relentless battle against the elements. The Vikings, those legendary seafarers, didn't just wake up one day and decide to raid their neighbors for fun. Their voyages were driven by necessity as much as adventure. With limited arable land and harsh winters, they needed to explore new territories to sustain their communities. The Norse sagas, with their tales of distant lands and epic battles, paint a picture of daring exploits, but the truth was often grittier. Imagine setting sail on a Nar, a sturdy yet cramped vessel, facing the North Atlantic's wrath with nothing but oars, sails, and sheer determination. The Vikings' navigational prowess was nothing short of remarkable. They didn't have GPS or even a reliable map. Instead, they relied on the sun, stars, and their own instincts. Talk about putting faith in your inner compass. Historical records suggest they reached as far as the North American coast around the year 1000, a good 500 years before Columbus. And while we might get starry-eyed about these maritime feats, the reality was brutal. Sea voyages were fraught with danger, from unpredictable weather to the ever-present threat of shipwreck. But let's not get too swept away by the salty romance of Viking voyages. Life back home was no picnic either. The Norse communities were largely agrarian, relying on farming and animal husbandry to eke out a living. The growing season was short, and the land was often unforgiving. It wasn't all feasts in Valhalla. More often, it was a struggle to put food on the table. The romantic image of the Viking warrior is compelling, but the reality was that most Norsemen were farmers first, warriors second. Their battles were as much against the land as they were against their enemies. Economically, the Norse society was a complex tapestry of trade and tribute. They were not just raiders, they were also traders, engaging in commerce that stretched from the Byzantine Empire to the British Isles. Silver was the currency of choice, with coins often melted down and traded by weight. This wasn't just a bunch of brawny men with axes. It was a society that understood the value of negotiation and alliances. And while the Vikings might have a reputation for taking what they wanted, they were also astute businessmen, savvy enough to recognize the power of a good deal. And speaking of deals, let's talk politics. The Norse world was a patchwork of chieftains, each vying for power and influence. These leaders were as much diplomats as they were warriors, navigating a landscape of shifting alliances and rivalries. Their sagas might glorify the heroic, but the reality was a constant dance of negotiation and compromise. It's a reminder that behind every epic tale of conquest, there's often a story of shrewd politicking. But what about the Norse women, those often overlooked figures in Viking lore? Women in Norse society had more agency than their medieval European counterparts. They could own land, initiate divorce, and wield influence in both domestic and public spheres. The sagas might focus on the exploits of men, but women were the glue that held Viking society together. They managed the farms, maintained the household, and ensured the survival of their kin. It's a testament to their resilience that they thrived in such a challenging environment. As we meander through these mythical realms, it's clear that the Norse cosmos was a reflection of their world, both the harshness and the beauty. The myths served as metaphors for the human condition, capturing the eternal struggle between order and chaos, survival and annihilation. And while it's easy to get lost in the romance of these stories, the truth is that the Norse lived on the edge of a world both magical and merciless. So, as we continue our tour of the 9 realms, let's keep in mind that behind every tale of gods and giants is a story about the human spirit. It's a saga of survival, ingenuity, and adaptation. A reminder that even in the bleakest of winters, there's warmth to be found in the hearth of human resilience. And as we journey onward, through realms of fire and ice, let's carry with us the lessons of these ancient myths, for they are as relevant today as they were a millennium ago. As we leave behind the cozy hearth of human resilience, let's step into the grand finale of Norse mythology, Ragnarok. Now, if you were expecting a no-holds-barred, cataclysmic showdown where the cosmos implodes into nothingness, think again. The Norse apocalypse has more in common with a cosmic spring cleaning than a doomsday scenario. This isn't the end of all things, folks. It's a universe-wide reset button. First, let's set the stage for the ultimate battle royale. Ragnarok isn't just some spur-of-the-moment cataclysm. It's a well-advertised event with a pretty detailed itinerary. The signs are all there, like a cosmic weather report you can't ignore. It kicks off with the Fimbulwinter, a brutal 3-year winter that makes The Long Night from Game of Thrones look like a light flurry. Imagine surviving not 1, not 2, but 3 endless winters without a single pumpkin spice latte in sight. The Norse people, accustomed to harsh climates, likely saw this as a metaphor for the kind of extreme weather they feared, a natural disaster that could decimate their communities. In this frosty prelude, moral order takes a nosedive. Brother turns against brother, and society collapses faster than you can say Viking feud. This might sound like a bleak vision, but it was also cautionary. The Norse knew that social cohesion was fragile, and Ragnarok served as a narrative reminder that without unity, civilizations crumble. Then the cosmic alarm clock goes off, and events ramp up. Loki, that ever-ambitious trickster, breaks free from his bonds because who didn't see that coming? Meanwhile, his kids, because yes, Loki's parenting skills are questionable at best, play significant roles. Jörmungandr, the world serpent, wraps around the earth, and Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, breaks free, looking for a snack. Spoiler, he finds Odin on the menu. It's a family reunion that makes your awkward Thanksgiving dinner look like a walk in the park. As these mythological figures lock horns, the stage is set for the battle to end all battles. The gods, led by Odin and Thor, go toe-to-toe with the giants in a cosmic smackdown that makes WrestleMania look tame. If you think this is just a tale of divine smackdowns and epic clashes, it's worth noting that these stories were more than just ancient Norse action movies. They reflected the harsh realities of life for people who faced constant threats, both from nature and from neighboring tribes. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a way to process and prepare for the unpredictable nature of life in a harsh world. Yet amid the chaos, there's a curious undercurrent of inevitability. Ragnarok is destined to happen, a fact the gods are fully aware of. It's a narrative soaked in fate, reflecting the Norse belief in the inescapability of destiny. But rather than leading to despair, this acceptance of fate underlines a certain resilience. The gods fight knowing they will fail, but that doesn't stop them from trying. It's a testament to the Norse ethos. Courage in the face of certain doom, a trait as useful in battle as it is when you're trying to eke out a living on a rocky Scandinavian farm. But here's the kicker. Unlike many apocalyptic narratives, Ragnarok ends not with a whimper, but with a whisper of renewal. After the dust settles and the cosmic scoreboard reads giants, 1, gods, 0, the world is reborn. A few surviving gods emerge, along with 2 humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, who repopulate the earth. It's like a mythological reboot, a chance to start over. This cyclical view of the apocalypse is telling, suggests a worldview where endings are not permanent, but part of a larger, ongoing cycle. This cycle of destruction and renewal likely resonated with the Norse, who lived in a world where each harsh winter was followed by the promise of spring. It was a narrative that mirrored the natural rhythms they depended on, offering both a warning and a promise. While the myths speak of inevitable doom, they also hold a flicker of hope, a belief that even after the darkest times, life begins anew. And let's not overlook the possible political and social messages embedded in these tales. Ragnarok might have served as a reminder of the consequences of unchecked power and ambition. The gods, with all their might and wisdom, could not prevent their downfall. In a society ruled by chieftains and kings, these stories could have been subtle warnings against hubris and the importance of maintaining balance and harmony within the community. Now, if you're thinking these stories are just ancient doom-scrolling with a Norse twist, think again. They offered a framework for understanding the chaos and unpredictability of life. In a world where you could lose your livelihood to a storm or a raid, narratives like Ragnarok provided a way to cope with uncertainty. They were a reminder that while fate might be inevitable, how you face it is up to you. So, as we stand on the edge of Ragnarok, let's take a moment to appreciate the Norse outlook on life and destiny. It's a perspective that combines acceptance and defiance, acknowledging the inevitability of fate while championing the courage to confront it head-on. It's a reminder that life's challenges are not just obstacles, but opportunities for renewal and growth. And as we continue our journey through Norse mythology, let's carry these lessons with us, for they are as relevant today as they were in the time of the Vikings. Stay tuned, because there's more chaos, courage, and cosmic wisdom to unravel as we delve deeper into the sagas of these ancient Norse legends. Remember, even when the world seems to end, it's just a new beginning waiting to unfold. And speaking of chaotic beginnings, let's dive into how Norse mythology has made waves in today's pop culture ocean. From Wagner's operatic Odysseys to Marvel's cinematic universe, these ancient tales have been reimagined, remixed, and sometimes downright mangled to fit modern tastes and narratives. But before we get all swoony over Thor's biceps or Loki's mischievous smirk, let's separate fact from fiction, myth from money-making. Now, Richard Wagner, the 19th century composer with a flair for drama, wasn't exactly shy about borrowing from Norse myths. His epic cycle of 4 operas, Der Ring des Nibelungen, that's the Ring of the Nibelung for those keeping score at home, is a testament to the grandeur and complexity of these stories. Wagner's operas, which premiered in 1876, span a whopping 15 hours and feature gods, giants, dwarfs, and a cursed ring that would give Tolkien a run for his money. While Wagner's librettos took liberties with the source material, they captured the mythic essence of power struggles, doomed heroes, and cosmic cataclysms. It was a colossal hit, setting the stage for Norse myths as high art, even if it did gloss over the less glamorous realities of Viking life, like the fact that the Norse diet was more smoked fish than divine feasts. Fast forward to the 21st century, and Norse mythology has found a new home in the neon-lit halls of Hollywood. Enter Marvel's Thor, a franchise that transformed the Norse god into an intergalactic superhero with a penchant for smashing things and cracking jokes. It's all very entertaining, but let's be clear. The films are about as historically accurate as a Viking wearing a horned helmet. Spoiler, they didn't. The real Thor was more about wrangling unruly giants than battling alien armies. But hey, who said mythology couldn't evolve? The Marvel movies have been a box office juggernaut, grossing over $4 billion worldwide. It's safe to say they've brought Norse mythology to a global audience, albeit with a healthy dose of Hollywood gloss. But here's the catch. While it's fun to see Thor trading quips with Iron Man, the films often sidestep the gritty realities and moral complexities of the original myths. Norse gods weren't just caped crusaders. They were capricious, flawed beings whose stories reflected the harshness of the Norse world, a place where survival was a daily challenge, and the divine order was anything but orderly. Behind the bright lights and special effects, there's a deeper reason these myths endure. They tap into universal themes of heroism, sacrifice, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. It's the same reason why, in their heyday, these stories held immense economic and social significance for the Norse people. The myths weren't just entertainment. They were a blueprint for understanding the world, a way to instill values and maintain social cohesion. In a society where the average life expectancy hovered around 35 years, these tales offered a way to confront mortality and find meaning in the unpredictable dance of life. And let's not forget the economic engine that these myths fueled. The Vikings weren't just warriors. They were traders and explorers, navigating the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic to establish trade routes that stretched from the Byzantine Empire to the British Isles. Their sagas and stories, much like today's business pitches, helped establish reputations and forge alliances. Silver was king in Norse commerce, often traded by weight rather than coin, and these economic networks were as much about storytelling as they were about goods and services. But while the myths have been romanticized over the centuries, it's crucial to acknowledge the grittier realities of Norse life. This wasn't just a world of epic battles and heroic deeds. It was a society built on a fragile balance of resourcefulness and resilience. The Norse people lived in a harsh environment where the growing season was short, and survival often depended on the whims of nature. Their myths, with their complex characters and unpredictable narratives, mirrored the uncertainties they faced daily. It's no surprise that these stories, full of both triumph and tragedy, continue to resonate with modern audiences. They're a reminder of the human capacity to find hope and meaning, even when the odds are stacked against us. So, why do these tales of gods and giants, of epic battles and cosmic resets, still captivate us today? Perhaps it's because they speak to something fundamental in the human spirit. the desire to make sense of the world, to find our place in the grand cosmic narrative. They remind us that life is a saga, full of challenges, victories and losses, and it's up to us to navigate it with courage and creativity. The Norse myths, with all their fantastical elements and moral complexities, offer a window into a worldview that embraced both the beauty and brutality of existence. They show us that even in the face of inevitable endings, there's always the promise of new beginnings. As we wrap up our journey through the Norse cosmos, let's carry with us the lessons of these ancient stories. They remind us of the power of storytelling to connect us, to challenge us, and to inspire us. In a world filled with uncertainty and change, they offer a timeless reminder that, while fate may be unavoidable, how we choose to face it is the true measure of our humanity. And as we continue to explore the myths and legends of the past, let's do so with an eye toward both the romance and the reality, the myth and the meaning, for it is in this balance that we find the truest reflection of ourselves. You find yourself squinting at the first light, poking through a high, narrow window in the Palace of Aachen. Welcome to the court of Charlemagne, where your morning routine as a courtier begins not with a cozy cup of coffee, but with a bucket of cold water. Hygiene in the 8th century is less about luxury and more about necessity. Forget the modern spa treatments. We're talking about splashing your face and occasionally dipping in a communal bath, if you're lucky enough to have access to one. Soap is for the privileged few, made from animal fat and ashes. Think of it as a medieval exfoliant. Breakfast is a humble affair. Charlemagne himself might start the day with a bit of bread, washed down with a goblet of watered-down wine or ale. Yes, even the emperor skips the orange juice. Back then, brewing was safer than trusting the water supply. The bread isn't the fluffy baguette of your dreams, but a dense, flat loaf that does the job of keeping your stomach from growling during morning prayers. It's all about sustenance, not satisfaction. As you chew on your morning rations, consider the economic machine that fuels this royal household. Charlemagne's court is a bustling hub of activity, and keeping it running requires the precision of clockwork. With an empire stretching across modern-day France, Germany, the Low Countries, and beyond, the logistics are staggering. The palace is a microcosm of this empire, teeming with servants, scribes, knights, and nobles, all of whom need to be fed, clothed, and housed. A single day in the court is a symphony of supply chains, with goods flowing in from all corners of the realm. Now, here's an interesting tidbit. Charlemagne's household operates on a budget that would make most modern accountants faint. The royal treasury might hold 200 pounds of silver, but every pound is stretched to its limit. Running a palace is no cheap affair. Imagine the cost of feeding hundreds of people daily, maintaining the palace grounds, and keeping horses in good condition. Horses, by the way, are the medieval equivalent of a Ferrari, essential for status and mobility, but an absolute drain on resources. The day's duties begin with a meeting in the Great Hall, a cavernous space where the emperor holds court. Charlemagne, known for his imposing presence and tireless energy, expects his courtiers to be sharp, ready to tackle the affairs of state. Forget the romanticized image of a king lounging on a throne with a crown perched on his head. Charlemagne is hands-on, involved in every aspect of governance. He's the CEO of an empire, and he demands results. Power and politics are the currency of the day. The court is an arena where alliances are forged and broken, and where ambition can be both a tool and a weapon. As a courtier, you're constantly navigating this web of influence, aware that a misstep could lead to a swift fall from grace. It's a high-stakes game, and everyone plays to win. In this world, even a king can't escape the grind. Charlemagne's mornings are filled with audiences, where he listens to petitions and issues edicts. It's a bit like being the complaint department for an empire, with nobles and commoners alike vying for his attention. The decisions made here ripple across the kingdom. A decree issued in Aachen might determine trade routes in distant lands or settle disputes among feuding lords. Throughout the morning, you're reminded that court life is as much about survival as it is about privilege. The palace might be a symbol of power, but it's also a reminder of the fragility of that power. Behind the grand door lies a delicate balance of economics, politics, and social hierarchy, all of which must be carefully managed to keep the empire humming along. So, as you navigate the halls of Charlemagne's court, remember, this isn't just history, It's a living, breathing world where every decision counts, and where the past is never as far away as it seems. The political engine of Charlemagne's empire is just heating up as mid-morning rolls around. You're about to witness the Carolingian administration swing into motion, and it isn't all grand declarations and noble gestures. If you thought the modern political circus had its share of chaos, wait until you see this medieval power play unfold. First up, let's talk about the Missi Dominici. Picture them as the emperor's trusted troubleshooters, sent out to keep the nobles in line and make sure everyone's paying their taxes, like ancient IRS agents with a side of diplomacy. Each pair of these envoys of the Lord roamed the empire, ensuring the local counts and bishops were towing the line. Charlemagne would send a layman and a cleric together, a dynamic duo of secular and sacred authority to prevent any funny business. It's a bit like sending Batman and a priest to solve Gotham's problems. One handles the muscle, the other the moral compass. Now, despite their mission to bring order, the reality was often less than perfect harmony. The Missi Dominici had to navigate the local power struggles, corruption, and logistical nightmares that came with governing an empire that sprawled across Europe. Imagine being tasked with enforcing rules when half the people don't even speak the same language, and the other half are more interested in their own agendas than the emperor's vision. It's like trying to organize a family reunion where no one agrees whether to bring potato salad or coleslaw. Meanwhile, back at the palace, council meetings are underway. These gatherings are where the real nitty-gritty of empire management happens. Charlemagne's palace is buzzing with scholars, advisors, and nobles all vying for influence. The emperor may have been known for his legendary wisdom, but even he needed a solid team to keep things running. The council is a mix of brilliant minds and seasoned politicians, all gathered to debate and decide the fate of the empire. Charlemagne sits at the head, not just as a figurehead, but as an active participant in the discussions. His decisions need to be as sharp as his sword, because one wrong move could send ripples of dissent through the realm. And here's where we debunk a myth with a wink. Charlemagne is often portrayed as a wise and benevolent ruler, the kind of king you'd invite to a TED talk on leadership. But the truth is, his court was as much about political maneuvering as it was about noble ideals. The emperor was adept at playing his nobles against one another, a strategy that kept them too busy squabbling to unite against him. It's the classic divide and conquer approach, and while it made for a stable reign, it definitely wasn't the stuff of fairy tales. Let's not forget the bureaucratic chaos that lurked beneath this seemingly well-oiled machine. The Carolingian administration was a sprawling affair, with records kept on wax tablets and parchment that were often lost or misinterpreted. Picture a medieval game of telephone, where the message at the end might have no resemblance to the one at the start. Even with the Missi Dominici and a council of advisors, communication across such vast distances was a Herculean task. The empire was a logistical nightmare, a testament to Charlemagne's ambition, but also a cautionary tale about the limits of centralized control in a world without Google Maps or email. Yet, despite the chaos, the court of Charlemagne was a hub of cultural and intellectual renaissance. Scholars from across the empire gathered to exchange ideas and knowledge. The emperor was a patron of the arts and education, setting up schools and encouraging the study of Latin, the lingua franca of the day. This wasn't just for show. It was a strategic move to unify his diverse empire under a common cultural and intellectual banner. But while the Renaissance was real, so was the grinding poverty and backbreaking labor that sustained it. The peasants plowing the fields and paying taxes were the unsung cogs in this grand machine, often overlooked in the romanticized tales of knights and chivalry. As mid-morning turns to noon, the bustling court slows for a brief respite. Courtiers take a moment to catch their breath, while Charlemagne retreats to his private chambers to ponder the weight of empire. It's a reminder that even the mightiest ruler needs a moment of reflection amidst the whirlwind of power and politics. And as you continue your day in the court, remember that beneath the grandeur and myth, there lies a tapestry woven with ambition, intrigue, and the relentless march of history. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. Charlemagne's afternoon is about to bring its own set of challenges and revelations. The court of Charlemagne gears up for one of the most critical rituals of the day, Lunch. It's about to become clear that dining in the 8th century is less about satisfying hunger and more about feeding the hungry beast that is political ambition. Forget the notion of a relaxing meal. This is a stage where every bite can tip the scales of power. In Charlemagne's court, lunch is a grand affair, not just a pit stop between morning petitions and afternoon council sessions. Picture a hall buzzing with the sound of clinking goblets, the murmur of whispered deals, and the occasional outburst of raucous laughter. The emperor's table is the epicenter of this social earthquake, and who gets to sit where is no random arrangement. It's a carefully curated seating chart, reflecting a hierarchy more complex than any modern corporate org chart. Let's talk food, but remember, this isn't your typical medieval feast of turkey legs and mead. The menu is as strategic as a chessboard, showcasing the empire's wealth and reach. Charlemagne's table might feature roasted game from the forests of Aachen, hearty stews spiced with pepper from far-off India, and bread made from the finest local grains. Pepper, by the way, is the medieval equivalent of gold dust. A single pound could set you back by what a laborer might earn in a month, if not more. The presence of such exotic spices is a testament to the sprawling trade networks that crisscross Charlemagne's empire. These routes are the veins through which the lifeblood of the court flows, connecting the Frankish lands with the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and beyond. It's an early example of globalization, long before the term was coined. Goods travel thousands of miles, changing hands more times than you can count, each stop adding a layer of cost and intrigue. By the time they reach the emperor's table, these ingredients have stories to tell, tales of traders, pirates, and savvy merchants who navigate treacherous seas and bandit-ridden roads to turn a profit. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality of medieval trade is harsh. Long journeys on perilous routes, high taxes, and the constant threat of loss. Yet, the allure of exotic goods keeps the wheels turning. The promise of pepper, saffron, and silks is enough to tempt even the most cautious of traders into taking risks that today might evoke thoughts of a kamikaze mission. Now, let's return to the dining hall, where Charlemagne sits at the head of the table, a king among kings, yet never quite alone. The emperor uses these meals as a tool to cement alliances and demonstrate power. Inviting a noble to dine with him is a gesture that speaks louder than any decree. It's a way to confer favor, to show who's in and who's out. If you're sitting close to the emperor, you're not just enjoying better food, you're basking in political sunshine. Sit too far, and you might as well be in political Siberia. And the stakes are high. A misstep at the table, using the wrong fork, metaphorically speaking, since forks won't become trendy for a few more centuries, can result in a loss of face that reverberates across the empire. Every action, every word, is scrutinized under the harsh light of courtly politics. One wrong move might mean you're not invited back, effectively shutting a door on opportunities as rich as the sources on the table. The emperor himself is no passive diner. Charlemagne is known for his robust appetite, not just for food but for discourse. He uses these meals to gauge the mood of his court, to listen, to learn, and to subtly steer conversations in directions that serve his interests. It's a bit like a modern business lunch, where the real deals happen over dessert rather than in the boardroom. Yet, not everything is sunshine and roses, or should I say venison and wine. The court's grandeur is built on the backs of those who toil in the fields and workshops. The peasants and artisans whose labor makes such displays possible often live in stark contrast to the opulence of the emperor's table. While the nobles feast, the majority of the population eats a diet that would make a modern dietitian wince, mostly bread, with the occasional bit of cheese or meat if they're lucky. It's a life of hard work, with little room for the indulgences enjoyed by their rulers. And let's debunk another myth while we're at it, the idea of a united court where everyone rallies around a benevolent ruler. Reality check. Charlemagne's court is a hotbed of ambition, with every noble jockeying for position, every decision weighed against personal gain. The emperor might be the sun around which the court orbits, but each planet is trying to pull a little closer to its own advantage. As the clatter of dishes begins to fade, and the courtiers prepare to return to the business of empire, keep in mind that these meals serve as a microcosm of Charlemagne's rule. They're a delicate balance of power and politics, where every detail is a piece of the larger puzzle that must be constantly adjusted to maintain order. The empire may have been built on the strength of Charlemagne's sword, but it's sustained through these subtle dances of diplomacy and delicacy. So, as you digest the intricacies of this meal, remember that the court of Charlemagne is a world where the past and present collide in a feast of power, ambition, and the relentless march of history. And while lunch might be over, the day is far from done. The court still has secrets to reveal, challenges to face, and stories to tell. Stay tuned, because the political theatre of Charlemagne's court is a production that never ceases, with each act promising more intrigue than the last. And just like that, the clamour of lunch fades into the background as the court gears up for the afternoon's main event, the Emperor's audience chamber. Now, this isn't some leisurely chat over tea. We're talking about medieval justice, Charlemagne style. It's a spectacle where the Emperor plays judge, jury, and occasionally executioner. Welcome to the legal system of the 8th century, where fairness is a concept as flexible as a contortionist at a circus. As the great hall fills with petitioners, you're about to witness a masterclass in medieval pragmatism. Charlemagne is often hailed as a model of fairness, but let's not kid ourselves. Justice in his court is as much about maintaining power as it is about doing the right thing. The emperor's reputation for fairness isn't built on some idealistic notion of equality. It's a strategic tool to keep his sprawling empire in check. Imagine stepping into the hall where the emperor sits on a raised dais, flanked by advisors who double as a medieval brain trust. The cases range from the mundane to the macabre, each a reflection of the complex tapestry that is Charlemagne's empire. You've got land disputes, accusations of theft, and even the occasional murder trial. And here's where it gets interesting. The emperor's judgments aren't just about interpreting the law. They're about reading the room, understanding who holds power locally, and ensuring that his decisions reinforce his authority. Let's dig deeper into this notion of justice. Charlemagne's court is governed by a patchwork of laws, Frankish, Lombard, and Saxon codes, to name a few. It's like a legal buffet where the emperor picks and chooses based on what suits the situation. That means a commoner caught stealing might face a different punishment than a noble with the same offense. Is it fair? Not by today's standards, but it's a reminder that justice in the Middle Ages is less about black and white and more about shades of grey. And let's not forget the role of loyalty. In a world where allegiances are as fickle as the weather, the emperor's ability to maintain control hinges on rewarding loyalty and punishing betrayal. Justice becomes a tool for solidifying alliances and quelling dissent. Charlemagne knows that a satisfied noble is less likely to cause trouble, so his rulings often reflect the delicate balance of power he must maintain. Now, about those legendary tales of Charlemagne's fairness. Sure, they make for great storytelling, but they gloss over the harsh realities of enforcing the law. The emperor's missi dominici, those trusty troubleshooters we mentioned before, are tasked with carrying out his decrees across the empire. But here's the kicker. Their ability to enforce justice depends heavily on local cooperation. It's one thing to issue an edict from Aachen. It's another to make sure it's actually followed in far-flung corners of the realm. And speaking of enforcement, let's talk about ordeals, those infamous medieval tests of innocence that make modern justice look downright cushy. You know, the ones where a suspect might be forced to hold a red-hot iron or be thrown into water to determine guilt. Survive unscathed, and you're innocent. Suffer burns or drown, and well, better luck in the afterlife. These ordeals are less about divine intervention and more about social control, a way to resolve disputes without the messiness of a drawn-out trial. Of course, the reality is that medieval justice is a high-stakes game where the rules can change at a moment's notice. The emperor's judgments are final, and the consequences can be severe. A noble stripped of land or a commoner sentenced to death serves as a stark reminder of Charlemagne's ultimate authority. Yet, for all its ruthlessness, the system is oddly effective at maintaining order in a vast and diverse empire. As the audience draws to a close, remember that the emperor's justice is as much about perception as it is about reality. Charlemagne must be seen as a fair and just ruler, even when his decisions are driven by the need to consolidate power. It's a balancing act where every judgment reflects the intricate dance of politics, loyalty, and pragmatism that defines his reign. So, as the afternoon sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the hall, take a moment to appreciate the complexities of medieval justice. It's a world where fairness is a commodity as rare as pepper, and where the emperor's word is both law and legend. Yet, even amidst the harsh realities, the myth of Charlemagne as a just ruler endures, a testament to the power of narrative in shaping history. Stay tuned, because the day is far from over, and the court of Charlemagne still has stories to tell, mysteries to unravel, and challenges to face. As the weight of justice lifts from the emperor's shoulders, and the afternoon sun begins to cast its golden glow over Aachen, the court of Charlemagne transitions into a different kind of hubbub. The air hums with the anticipation of evening pursuits. No, not the kind that involve Netflix and chill, but rather the intellectual and cultural endeavors that define this era. Welcome to the Carolingian Renaissance, where the pursuit of knowledge is as intoxicating as the finest wine. Now, let's set the scene. Charlemagne, the man of many hats, king, emperor, and occasional judge, also fancies himself a champion of learning. His court is a beacon for scholars, a medieval think tank of sorts, where the brightest minds of the age gather to resurrect the glories of classical antiquity. It's like a TED conference for the 8th century, minus the PowerPoint presentations and awkward networking sessions. The driving force behind this intellectual revival is Charlemagne's desire to unify his empire under a common cultural and intellectual framework. The emperor is no bookish recluse, but he's savvy enough to know that a well-educated clergy and administration can help cement his legacy. So, he turns to Alcuin of York, his intellectual sidekick, to spearhead this scholarly renaissance. Alcuin is a veritable rock star of the medieval academic world, tasked with overhauling the educational system and laying the groundwork for what would become the medieval university. Here's where the concrete data kicks in. Charlemagne establishes the Palace School at Aachen, a prototype for future centers of learning. It's a place where Latin is not just spoken, but revered, breathing new life into the language of the Romans. The curriculum includes grammar, rhetoric, and dialectic, the trivium of classical education, as well as arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, known as the quadrivium. These are the building blocks of what we today call the liberal arts. But let's pause and debunk a myth, the idea that all of Charlemagne's subjects were suddenly transformed into scholars overnight. The reality is far more nuanced. Literacy rates remain low, with education largely confined to the elite and the clergy. For the average peasant, whose daily grind involves more ploughing than pondering Plato, the Renaissance is as distant as the stars they toil under. Yet, for those within the court's orbit, these intellectual pursuits are nothing short of revolutionary, laying the groundwork for future advancements in art, science, and philosophy. As evening falls, the court transforms into a salon of sorts, a medieval mixer where courtiers and scholars mingle, debate, and exchange ideas. Picture clusters of learned men animatedly discussing Aristotle, as scribes hurriedly jot down notes on wax tablets to ensure no nugget of wisdom is lost. It's a vibrant scene, where the clatter of intellectual discourse rivals the noise of the day's earlier political machinations. Yet, for all its cultural splendor, Charlemagne's court is a study in contradictions. While the emperor is busy reviving classical learning, he's also enforcing a strict brand of Christianity that leaves little room for dissent. Pagan traditions are systematically dismantled, often with a brutal efficiency that would make even the most zealous inquisitor blush. The emperor's quest for cultural unity is as much about control as it is about enlightenment. It's the carrot and stick approach of governance. Celebrate the classics, but toe the line or face the consequences. This brings us to another myth ripe for debunking. Charlemagne, the unblemished father of Europe. Sure, he's a unifier, but his methods are not all sunshine and roses. His military campaigns are relentless, his justice system occasionally ruthless, and his religious zeal unyielding. The Carolingian Renaissance is as much about consolidating power as it is about cultural revival. It's a double-edged sword, where progress often comes at the expense of plurality. Yet, even in this world of paradoxes, there's a certain romance to Charlemagne's vision, a medieval dream of a united Christendom, guided by the light of reason and faith. It's a vision that resonates through the ages, influencing the political and cultural landscape of Europe for centuries to come. But let's not get too misty-eyed. Charlemagne's legacy is as complex as the man himself, a blend of ambition, intellect, and a touch of ruthlessness that leaves an indelible mark on history. As the evening draws to a close, and the court begins to settle into a more subdued rhythm, take a moment to reflect on the tapestry of life in Charlemagne's court. It's a world where power and politics intermingle with culture and intellect, where the past and future collide in a dance as intricate as the illuminated manuscripts crafted by the emperor's scribes. In the glow of the hearth, surrounded by the hum of scholarly debate, one can almost sense the echoes of a bygone era, a time when an emperor dared to dream of a united empire built on the twin pillars of faith and reason. It's a story of ambition and contradiction, of progress and preservation, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to seek knowledge and understanding amidst the chaos of history. So, as you drift into the realm of dreams, remember that the court of Charlemagne is more than just a footnote in history. It's a living, breathing testament to the complexities of power, the allure of knowledge, and the relentless march of time. And as the stars twinkle over Archon, casting their timeless gaze upon the earth, know that the legacy of Charlemagne endures, a beacon of light in the annals of history, guiding the way for generations yet to come. If you think having a flashy neighbor is a modern problem, welcome to Nubia around 1070 BCE, where the kingdom of Kush was learning to deal with living next to the ancient world's equivalent of the Kardashians, Egypt. Up the Nile River, about 200 kilometers south of Egypt's pyramid-studded skyline, the Kushite civilization was busy carving out its own piece of history. The Nile was like the ancient superhighway, and these folks were living in the fast lane, between the first and fourth cataracts. That's fancy talk for a stretch of the river with more twists and turns than a season finale plot twist, and lots of rocks ready to sink your boat if you weren't paying attention. Now, if Egypt was the booming metropolis with all the bling, Kush was the cool, understated neighbor who knew how to throw together an empire without the constant need for gold-leaf everything. But don't let the lack of gold-tipped pyramids fool you. Kush was a powerhouse of its own, controlling trade routes and resources, while Egypt was busy perfecting the art of dramatic eyeliner. Let's talk origins. Nubia, the home turf of the Kushites, wasn't just a barren stretch of desert with a river running through it. This land was rich with resources like gold, copper, and iron long before the Kushites made it their kingdom's heart. And boy, did they know how to use them. While the Egyptians were busy building massive stone tributes to their egos, the Kushites were mastering the art of iron smelting and weapon crafting, which, let's face it, comes in handy when you're trying to build an empire. Kush's prime location wasn't just a geographic happenstance, it was a strategic jackpot. Being at the crossroads of Africa and the Middle East, they had their fingers in every pie, trade, culture, and occasional sibling-style squabbles with Egypt. It's like being at the best spot for a garage sale on the busiest street in town, where everyone wants to stop by and see what you're selling or, sometimes, just take it by force. Speaking of force, let's not forget the drama. The relationship between Kush and Egypt was like a long-running soap opera, complete with alliances, betrayals, and the occasional hostile takeover. While Egypt often looked down on its southern neighbor, Kush was no pushover. In fact, they had their moments of glory when roles were reversed, with Kushite kings ruling over Egypt as pharaohs in the 25th dynasty. Spoiler alert, it's a story worthy of its own Netflix series. Kush's rulers were savvy, taking a page out of Egypt's playbook but adding their own flair. They adopted Egyptian gods but worshipped them with a Kushite twist. They built pyramids, but smaller and with a unique architectural style that said, "Yes, we see your pyramids, but check out what we can do with this." Economically, Kush was no slouch either. The kingdom was thriving thanks to its control over gold mines, and it didn't take a PhD in economics to know that gold means power. They also traded in ivory, ebony, and exotic animals, making them the go-to guys for luxury goods. We're talking the ancient equivalent of a high-end department store, minus the annoying perfume spritzing staff. But life wasn't all gold and glamour. The harsh reality was that living in such a fertile land meant constant attention from Egypt, who often saw Kush as a little brother in need of guidance, or rather, someone from whom they could occasionally borrow resources without asking. Sure, there were times of peace and prosperity, but the threat of conflict was never far away. Despite the challenges, Kush managed to build cities that were marvels of planning and architecture. Take Kerma, one of the earliest urban centers, which boasted massive walls and a grand temple complex. It was like the ancient world's version of a gated community, complete with all the amenities a ruler could want. And let's not overlook the capital city of Napata, which became a cultural and political hub, proving that Kush wasn't just surviving but thriving. So, there you have it. The kingdom of Kush, a civilization often overshadowed by its more famous neighbor, but one that stood tall in its own right. The Kushites were more than just Egypt's southern cousins. They were the architects of a vibrant, powerful kingdom that played a crucial role in the history of the Nile Valley. Stay tuned, because the drama, innovation, and achievements of Kush are just getting started. But let's not just stand around marveling at Kush's past achievements. There's an empire to run, and the kingdom of Kush was about to put the power in powerhouse. Fast forward to around 750 BCE and cue the dramatic music. It's the rise of the Napatan dynasty, and the Kushites are about to show Egypt that they weren't just the cool neighbor next door. They were ready to be the landlord. First up on the list of Kushite overachievers is Pi, a ruler who decided enough was enough with playing second fiddle. Pi, also known as Pianki, was like the ultimate comeback kid, the underdog who wasn't content with a mere participation trophy. He looked over at Egypt, saw the chaos of a divided nation caught up in its own civil wars, and thought, why not? In 747 BCE, he marched north with an army that was as formidable as it was determined. It wasn't just about brute strength, though. Oh no, Pi was a master of strategy. He knew that controlling Egypt wasn't just about winning battles, but about winning hearts, or at least convincing the Egyptian elite that he was the new boss. Pi's campaign was like an ancient masterclass in military strategy, with a dash of psychological warfare thrown in for good measure. His forces moved like a well-oiled machine, thanks in no small part to Kush's mastery of iron. While everyone else was still clanging bronze swords together, Pi's troops were slicing through the opposition with iron blades that made them the envy of the ancient world. It's like showing up to a medieval joust with a Ferrari while everyone else is still riding horses. By the time Pi was done, he wasn't just a king, he was a pharaoh, and not just any pharaoh, but one who knew how to manage an empire. Pi had style, and he knew how to use it. At the heart of his empire was Napata, a city that wasn't just a political hub, but a cultural one too. Napata was the beating heart of Kushite power, a place where trade routes converged and cultures blended. It was like the ancient version of a bustling metropolis, where you could find anything from ivory to incense if you knew which alley to wander down. But ruling an empire isn't all glory and gold. It's also about the nitty-gritty of governance. Pi understood that to keep his newly acquired territories in line, he had to be more than just a conqueror. He had to be a statesman. He made sure that local Egyptian rulers knew they were still important, just not as important as him. It's like being at a party where you know you're not the host, but you definitely have the best stories to tell. Pi's reign was just the opening act, though. Enter Taharqa, a Kushite pharaoh who was all about the long game. Taharqa wasn't just interested in ruling. He wanted to make sure everyone knew he was in charge, and for a good reason. During his reign from 690 to 664 BCE, he took Kushite power to new heights, both literally and figuratively. Under Taharqa, monumental building projects sprouted up left and right, like the temple at Kawa, which was a testament to both religious devotion and political power. It's as if he wanted to leave a legacy that would make future generations look up and say, wow, that guy really knew how to run a kingdom. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Running an empire wasn't all about grand temples and impressive titles. Taharqa had his own set of challenges, not least of which was dealing with the Assyrians. Now, if you're thinking the Assyrians sound like the kind of guests who show up uninvited and overstay their welcome, you'd be right. The Assyrians were a force to be reckoned with, and they had a knack for showing up at the least convenient times. Imagine trying to throw an empire-sized party, only to have the Assyrians crash it, making demands, and generally being a nuisance. Taharqa, however, wasn't about to let the Assyrians ruin his reign. He fought them off with the kind of military prowess that would make any general nod in approval. But it wasn't just about the battles. It was about the bigger picture. Taharqa knew that to keep his empire intact, he needed to maintain a delicate balance between power and diplomacy. He was like a tightrope walker, gracefully navigating the fine line between maintaining control and keeping the peace. All the while, Taharqa was also dealing with the internal pressures of ruling such a vast and diverse empire. Keeping the Egyptians happy was a full-time job in itself, and he was constantly juggling the needs of his Kushite homeland with those of his Egyptian subjects. But Taharqa was nothing if not resourceful, and he managed to keep the empire running smoothly, at least for a while. Let's not forget the economic powerhouse that was Kush. With its control over trade routes and resources like gold, ebony, and ivory, Kush was the ancient equivalent of a luxury goods market. They had the goods everyone wanted, and they knew how to keep the ancient world coming back for more. It's like being the only coffee shop in a town full of caffeine addicts. You can pretty much write your own ticket. Despite the external threats and internal pressures, the Kushite leaders knew how to play the political game. They were adept at forming alliances and knew when to flex their military muscles. It's like knowing when to bluff and when to go all in during a high-stakes poker game. They had a knack for navigating the complex geopolitical landscape of the time, keeping their empire intact even as the world around them shifted like desert sands. But the story of the kingdom of Kush is far from over. As the Kushite rulers continued to hold their own against the likes of the Assyrians and managed to maintain a thriving empire, they were setting the stage for the next chapter in their storied history. Stay tuned, because if you thought the Napatan dynasty was the peak of Kushite power, the drama, intrigue, and innovation are only just beginning. The Kushite saga is far from finished, and the next installment promises to be just as riveting as the last. As the Kushite rulers continue to hold their own against the likes of the Assyrians, proving that diplomacy and a good sword arm could coexist, something else was brewing back in the heartland. While Taharqa was busy juggling empires like a circus performer with too many flaming torches, the folks back home in Kush were channeling their inner HGTV stars. You see, the kingdom of Kush wasn't just about military might and economic prowess. They had some serious flair for culture and architecture that would make any modern architect swoon. First stop on our cultural tour, Merer. By the time Taharqa was flexing his muscles, Merer was on the rise as the new center of Kushite power, roughly 400 kilometers northeast of Napata. Think of Merer as the Renaissance city of its day, where the pyramid-building boom was in full swing. And when I say boom, I mean it. We're talking over 200 pyramids, more than the number gracing the sands of Egypt. These weren't your colossal Giza-style pyramids, mind you. No, the Kushites had their own spin, building smaller, steeper versions that were more like the sports cars of pyramids, sleek, efficient, and packed with all the style you could want. But why all the pyramid building, you ask? Well, these were no mere vanity projects. For the Kushites, pyramids were part of a grand cultural tapestry, intricately woven with religious significance and political power. Each pyramid served as a royal tomb, a stone-clad statement that said, "I was here, and I mattered." And unlike their Egyptian neighbors, the Kushites didn't just reserve these for kings. Nope, queens and princes got in on the action too. Speaking of queens, let's talk about the Kandaks, the powerful queens of Kush who were more than just figureheads. They were rulers in their own right, often leading armies and negotiating with foreign powers. Move over, Cleopatra. These women were the real deal. One standout Kandak was Ammonionas, who reigned from around 40 BCE to 10 BCE. She wasn't just content to sit on a throne and look regal. When the Romans, under Emperor Augustus, got a little too close for comfort, Ammonionas decided it was time to show them exactly what a Kandak could do. Leading her troops into battle, she fought the Romans to a standstill, eventually negotiating a peace treaty that favored Kush. Talk about flipping the script on imperial ambition. Now, if you're thinking the Kushites were just Egypt-lite in their religious practices, think again. Sure, they borrowed a lot from their northern neighbors, but they added their own unique flair. The Meroitic religion was a fascinating blend that included the Egyptian pantheon, with gods like Ammon and Isis, but with a decidedly Kushite twist. Ammon, for instance, was often depicted as a ram, a nod to local traditions. And let's not forget Apidamak, the lion-headed warrior god, who was pure Kushite invention, representing the kingdom's martial prowess and divine protection. All this divine attention wasn't just for show. Religion played a crucial role in keeping the economy ticking along. Temples were bustling centers of activity, where priests not only performed rituals, but also managed trade and resources. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of multitasking CEOs, balancing the books while appeasing the guards. And speaking of trade, the Kushites were savvy merchants, dominating the exchange of luxury goods like gold, ivory, and exotic animals. It's like they had a permanent spot at the world's fanciest flea market, and everyone wanted what they were selling. But let's not get too starry-eyed here. Life in Kush wasn't all pyramid building and divine worship. The harsh reality was that maintaining such a vibrant culture required resources, and lots of them. Managing these resources was a constant balancing act, like keeping a dozen plates spinning on sticks. And when you're sitting on a treasure trove of gold and iron, everyone wants a piece of the action, sometimes whether you like it or not. Despite these challenges, the Kushites didn't just survive, they thrived. Their ability to adapt, innovate, and integrate influences from surrounding cultures made them a unique player in the ancient world. They weren't just the neighbors to the south. They were a civilization that stood on its own, with a rich cultural legacy that still captures our imagination today. And while the Egyptians might have had the flashier reputation, the Kushites were the ones quietly shaping history, one pyramid at a time. So, as we leave Merare and its architectural wonders behind, remember that the kingdom of Kush was more than just a footnote in Egypt's story. It was a vibrant, powerful kingdom in its own right, one that knew how to balance power, culture, and economy with a deftness that would make any modern leader envious. Stay tuned, because the next chapter in Kush's saga promises more of the drama, intrigue, and innovation that have defined this remarkable civilization. And who knows what other surprises the kingdom of Kush has in store. As we bid farewell to the architectural wonders of Merare, it's time to pull back the curtain on the behind-the-scenes drama that led to the kingdom of Kush's ultimate curtain call. Picture this. It's 350C, and while construction projects are still shooting up like weeds after a rainstorm, the kingdom of Kush isn't quite the vibrant powerhouse it once was. The party was winding down, and it wasn't just the neighbors complaining about the noise. No, this was a real ancient world soap opera, filled with trade route shake-ups, Roman interludes, and a serious case of internal bickering. It's the classic tale of an empire that had it all, but somehow lost the plot along the way. For starters, those trade routes that once made Kush the ancient world's version of Rodeo Drive. Well, they were now experiencing a bit of a traffic jam, and not the kind you can solve with a few detour signs. The rise of the Kingdom of Axum across the Red Sea was like the hottest new show on TV, and all eyes and goods were turning eastward. Axum was the cool new kid on the block, flaunting its control over trade between the Roman Empire and India, and making Kush's old trade routes look like yesterday's news. It's like when a new coffee shop opens, and suddenly everyone forgets about the trusty old diner that's been serving the best pie in town. But shifting trade routes were just the tip of the iceberg. Enter the Romans, those ever-ambitious builders of empires, who took one look at Nubia and thought, why not add it to our collection? You see, the Romans were never ones to shy away from a good conquest, and even though they never fully annexed Kush, their presence was felt like that one guest who overstays their welcome, always eyeing the last piece of cake you were saving. Now, the Romans weren't just interested in expanding their borders. They were also keen on securing their grain supply from Egypt. This meant that any disruptions in the Nile Valley, where Kush was a major player, could spell trouble for Rome's breadbasket. So, what does an empire do when it needs to keep its food supply steady? They get involved, of course, often in ways that left the locals feeling more than a little put out. Roman incursions into the region were sporadic but persistent, and while they weren't always successful in their military endeavors, they certainly left a mark. Meanwhile, back in Kush, things weren't exactly smooth sailing. Internal strife began to bubble up, as it often does when times get tough. The once unified kingdom started to fracture, with regional leaders more interested in their own power plays than the prosperity of the whole. It's like a band that's been playing together for years, suddenly going off-key because everyone wants to be the lead singer. And while the royal family was busy squabbling over who got to sit in the big chair, the economy was taking a hit. The iron industry, which had once been the backbone of Kushite economic might, was facing stiff competition from new players in the market. Iron production in Kush had made them the envy of their neighbors, but now it was more like an aging rock star trying to keep up with the latest pop sensation. The glory days of ironclad dominance were fading, and with them, the economic stability that had kept the kingdom afloat. And let's not forget about the environmental factors. The climate was shifting, and with it, the agricultural yields that had sustained the population. It's a classic case of Mother Nature deciding to throw a wrench in the works just when things were already teetering on the edge. The fertile lands along the Nile were becoming less reliable, and food shortages became more common, adding fuel to the fire of discontent. So, there you have it. A perfect storm of trade disruptions, external pressures, internal power struggles, and environmental changes. It's the kind of drama that would make for a great historical epic, but for the Kushites, it was an everyday reality. By the time the kingdom of Aksum was rising to prominence, Kush was on the decline, its once great cities slowly losing their luster. But just because the party's over doesn't mean it's time to pack up and go home. The legacy of Kush remains, a testament to a civilization that, for centuries, stood as a beacon of cultural and economic innovation. And while the spotlight might have shifted to Aksum, the echoes of Kush's influence continued to reverberate throughout the region, a reminder of a time when they were the ones setting the stage. As we prepare to explore what comes next, remember that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry of human ambition, folly, and resilience. The kingdom of Kush may have faded from view, but its story is far from over. So stay tuned, because the next chapter promises to be just as captivating as the ones before it. And who knows what other hidden gems the ancient world has in store for us. So, as the dust settled on the kingdom of Kush's final act, let's talk legacy. Because if there's one thing history loves more than a good rise and fall narrative, it's the echo of a civilization's influence reverberating through time. And boy, did Kush leave some serious reverberations. Now, we all know Egypt tends to hog the limelight like a lead singer who won't share the stage. But the kingdom of Kush deserves its own spotlight for shaping the region long after its own decline. Let's start with some archaeological gems. Picture the scene. It's the late 19th century, and European archaeologists are scrambling across Africa like kids in a candy store. They're searching for relics, and guess what? Kush didn't disappoint. Over in Meroe, those iconic pyramids we mentioned, they were rediscovered, standing proudly amidst the sands, a testament to Kush's architectural prowess. With over 200 pyramids, more than Egypt, thank you very much, Meroe served as a reminder that the Kushites were no mere understudies. Each pyramid was a history book written in stone, telling tales of rulers who knew how to blend Egyptian flair with their own unique style. But it's not just about the pyramids, folks. Archaeologists found palaces, temples, and royal baths, all speaking volumes about a civilization that was no slouch when it came to construction. The great Temple of Ammon at Meroe, for instance, was a sprawling complex that would have made even the most devout Egyptian priest nod in approval. And let's not overlook the royal baths, because even in antiquity, nothing says power like a good soak. Now, you might be wondering why these finds matter today. Well, they do more than just fill museum display cases. They challenge the age-old narrative that Africa's contributions to ancient history were limited to the shadow of Egypt. The artifacts and ruins of Kush serve as tangible proof that this was a civilization with its own agency, one that influenced trade, culture, and politics across the Nile Valley and beyond. Kush was the connective tissue in a world that often gets reduced to a binary of Egyptian dominance versus everyone else. Fast forward to the modern day, and the kingdom of Kush is finally getting its due. In Sudan, where ancient Kush once thrived, there's a growing movement to reclaim and celebrate this rich heritage. The pyramids of Meroe even made it onto the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2011, a belated but well-deserved recognition. It's a nod to a culture that thrived in the harsh environment of the Nubian desert, adapting and innovating in ways that still inspire today. And what about the economy? The ever-present driver of history. Kush was an economic powerhouse in its time, controlling gold mines and trade routes that would make any modern entrepreneur salivate. This wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving in a challenging landscape. The legacy of Kush's economic ingenuity can still be seen in the way modern Sudan navigates its own resources, from minerals to agriculture. The echoes of Kushite trade practices linger, a reminder of a time when they were the ancient world's version of Wall Street. Politically, Kush was a masterclass in diplomacy and strategy. Remember those Kandaks? These queens weren't just figureheads. They were power players, leading armies and negotiating treaties. Their legacy is a testament to the role of women in leadership, something that resonates strongly in today's conversations about gender equality. Kush wasn't just ahead of its time. It was setting precedents that would take centuries to catch up with. Let's not forget the linguistic legacy. The Meroitic script, still undeciphered in its entirety, tantalizes linguists and historians alike. It's a reminder of the complexities of Kushite society, a civilization that communicated and recorded its history in a language uniquely its own. The script is an unsolved puzzle, a tantalizing glimpse into a world that still holds secrets waiting to be uncovered. And then there are the ancient texts. While we don't have Kushite poets filling volumes of verse, we do have inscriptions and records that offer a peek into the mindset of this formidable civilization. Take this gem from a stellar of Pi, who once declared, "I am a king, a son of a king, a son of a king's son." It's the ancient equivalent of a mic drop, a reminder of Kush's royal lineage and its deep roots in the Nile's fertile narrative soil. So why does Kush matter? Because it challenges us to rethink history, to look beyond the towering shadows of Egypt and see the vibrant tapestry of cultures that shaped the ancient world. Kush was more than just a southern neighbor. It was a kingdom of innovation, resilience, and influence. Its legacy is a testament to the fact that history is not just written by the victors, but also by those who, despite fading from power, left an indelible mark on the world. In wrapping up our journey through the kingdom of Kush, remember this: history is a complex, intertwined narrative. It's not just about the rise and fall of empires, but about the legacies they leave behind. Legacies that continue to shape our world in ways both seen and unseen. The kingdom of Kush might not have the same name recognition as Egypt, but its story is every bit as compelling, a reminder of a time when the Nile's southern banks hummed with the vibrant pulse of a great civilization. So here's to Kush, the kingdom that once was, but never truly left. In the early months of 1918, while the eyes of the world were glued to the grim theaters of World War I, an unexpected adversary slipped through the back door of history. It wasn't a new military powerhouse or a secret weapon. No, it was far stealthier than any covert ops, an invisible invader launching its assault from a humble military camp in Kansas. Yes, Kansas. Not exactly the place you'd expect to start a global pandemic, but here we are. Camp Funston, part of Fort Riley, was the unlikely ground zero. On March 4, 1918, a company cook named Albert Gitschel reported symptoms that seemed like your average flu: fever, sore throat, headache. By the end of the day, more than 100 soldiers were sick. Within weeks, thousands were bedridden. Talk about a bad day at the office. It was flu season on steroids, and no one had a clue what they were dealing with. While the camp's doctors were scratching their heads, the world was still reeling from 4 years of relentless warfare. The Great War, as it was known before we had to start numbering them, was dragging on with a body count that resembled a macabre scoreboard. Countries were throwing everything they had at the front lines, including their young men, who were now unwittingly ferrying the virus from the heart of America to the trenches of Europe. Here's the kicker: troop movements were like a global delivery service for this flu. Soldiers cramped in trains, ships, and barracks with all the personal space of a sardine in a can, made for perfect incubators. The virus was hitching rides across the Atlantic faster than anyone could say Gesundheit. By April, it had reached France, and from there it was off to the races. Now, let's talk medicine, or the quaint 1918 version of it. Modern medicine was still in its awkward adolescence. The wonders of antibiotics were a decade away, and the healthcare system was as sophisticated as a high school science experiment gone wrong. Doctors were armed with little more than aspirin, whiskey, and a good bedside manner. Germ theory was coming into vogue, but viruses were still the stuff of imagination. Literally. They weren't even visible because electron microscopes wouldn't be around for another couple of decades. It was like trying to win a game of darts blindfolded. So, what did the public health officials do? They shrugged and got to work with what they had. Quarantine, isolation, and good old-fashioned hope were the order of the day. There were no vaccines, no antiviral treatments, and absolutely no TikTok videos to guide the masses. It was a wild west of medical intervention, with everyone throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what stuck. Meanwhile, the war machine didn't stop. The reality was that the flu was just another hurdle in a marathon of misery. Governments were more concerned with winning battles than waging a war on germs. Soldiers were needed at the front, and an outbreak of the sniffles wasn't going to derail that. The irony of sending men from the trenches to the infirmary and back again was lost on no one. The term cannon fodder never seemed so apt. As the flu spread, it didn't discriminate. It infected the young, the fit, and those in their prime, the very demographic that usually shrugs off seasonal illnesses like a bad date. The virus had a penchant for young adults, a truly unusual twist that left scientists baffled. Turns out, it was a strain of H1N1 influenza, and its predilection for young soldiers wasn't just a sick joke, it was a biological anomaly. The broader context was a world already on its knees. Economies were tanking, societies were stretched thin, and the morale of nations was barely hanging on. The Spanish flu, as it came to be misleadingly known, thanks to Spain being one of the few countries that didn't censor news of the outbreak, was the sucker punch no one saw coming. It was like adding a hurricane to a shipwreck. And just to clarify, Spain wasn't the origin. It was just the one shouting about it, while others kept their lips sealed tighter than a submarine's hatch. The ripple effect was vast. At the end of 1918, the flu had affected an estimated one-third of the global population, with death toll estimates ranging from 20 million to 50 million people. Some even suggest it was closer to 100 million. That's more people than there are in modern-day Egypt, wiped out by a virus that didn't even have a passport. It outpaced the war itself, spreading with a merciless efficiency that left the world gasping for breath in more ways than one. And so, the story of the 1918 flu pandemic began in Kansas, a place known more for its sunflowers and Dorothy's adventures in ours than for global crises. It was a strange twist of fate that saw soldiers marching from the trenches to the physician's office, carrying with them an enemy no battlefield strategy could defeat. As the flu spread, the world was forced to confront the limits of its medical knowledge and the fragility of its own systems, setting the stage for a pandemic that would redefine the 20th century and beyond. The 1918 flu pandemic, like a world tour nobody ordered, continued its relentless advance, exploiting the chaos of World War I like a cunning opportunist at a fire sale. With troop movements serving as its travel itinerary, the virus didn't just stroll across the globe, it sprinted. Soldiers, already seasoned travelers thanks to the war, became inadvertent couriers for this microscopic menace, spreading it to the far corners of the earth with the speed and enthusiasm of a viral TikTok dance challenge. By late spring of 1918, the virus had crossed the Atlantic, hitching a ride with American troops landing in the French ports of Brest, Bordeaux, and Saint-Nazaire. From there, it galloped across Europe, where the continent's overcrowded cities and battle-scarred infrastructure were more inviting to the flu than a five-star hotel. London, Paris, and Berlin were soon in its grip, as were the battlefields of the Western Front, where soldiers were packed tighter than a can of sardines on a transatlantic cruise. And speaking of cruises, let's not forget the naval ships. These floating petri dishes were perfect for the virus. Sailors, cooped up together, and with nowhere to go but the open sea, became unwitting incubators, ensuring the flu's uninterrupted journey to every continent. By the time it reached the southern hemisphere, it was the unwelcome guest at a party already in full swing. Now, let's talk numbers, because the statistics are as staggering as they are sobering. By the end of 1919, the pandemic had infected roughly 500 million people worldwide, about a third of the global population at the time. Mortality rates varied wildly, but estimates suggest somewhere between 50 million and 100 million souls were lost. That's more than the current population of the UK, and just a bit shy of modern Germany. It was a grim reminder of the virus's indiscriminate nature and its ability to transcend borders, languages, and political ideologies with a chilling efficiency. But despite its global impact, the flu acquired a misleading label, the Spanish flu. Why Spain, you ask? Well, Spain was one of the few countries that actually reported on the pandemic. While other nations were busy censoring news to maintain wartime morale, Spain, not involved in the conflict, had no such qualms. So when King Alfonso Roman XIII got sick, the Spanish newspapers did what newspapers do. They reported it. And just like that, the flu had a new, albeit inaccurate, PR campaign. Meanwhile, wartime censorship played a curious role in the pandemic's discourse, or lack thereof. Governments, worried about public panic and maintaining morale, downplayed the flu's severity. In the United States, President Woodrow Wilson never publicly addressed the pandemic, even as it ravaged the country. Across the pond, British newspapers were more focused on battlefront victories than the viral enemy at home. It was a classic case of, if we don't talk about it, maybe it will go away. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The interplay of censorship and public awareness created a strange dichotomy. On one hand, citizens were left largely in the dark about the true scale of the pandemic. On the other, rumors and misinformation filled the void, leading to a patchwork understanding of the crisis that varied from city to city and country to country. This lack of consistent information fueled myths and misconceptions, feeding the narrative of the Spanish flu and obscuring its true origins. Economic factors also shaped the pandemic's trajectory. As the virus spread, it exacerbated existing strains on global economies reeling from the war. Industries that relied on manpower, agriculture, manufacturing, and transportation were hit hard as workers fell ill or died. This, in turn, affected supply chains and food production, leading to shortages and inflation. It was a vicious cycle. The flu weakened economies, and weakened economies struggled to combat the flu. In cities, public health measures were a patchwork affair. Some places implemented quarantines, closed schools, and banned public gatherings. Others, perhaps in a bout of wishful thinking, carried on as usual, hoping the flu would be little more than a bad memory by Christmas. Spoiler alert number 2. It wasn't. The lack of a coordinated response revealed the limits of public health infrastructure and highlighted the need for more robust systems, a lesson the world would revisit time and again throughout the 20th century. Yet, despite the chaos, there were moments of resilience and creativity. In Philadelphia, when health officials finally decided to act, they converted a shipyard into a makeshift hospital in just 8 days. In San Francisco, the city mandated masks, a fashion statement that was as controversial then as it would be a century later. And in New York, the health commissioner famously said, "Wear a mask or go to jail," a phrase that, if nothing else, would make a great slogan for a dystopian sci-fi film. Through it all, the flu pandemic of 1918 remained an enigmatic adversary. Its origins in Kansas, its spread through the arteries of war, and its branding as the Spanish flu were all part of a narrative that was as much about human behavior as it was about the virus itself. It was a story of movement, of soldiers, ships, and misinformation, playing out against the backdrop of a world in turmoil. As the pandemic continued its march into 1919, the world was forced to confront the limits of its understanding and the fragility of its interconnected systems. It was a harsh reminder that in the grand theater of history, nature often has the final curtain call. And as the virus moved from one continent to the next, it left behind a legacy of lessons and a world forever changed. Stay tuned as we explore the aftermath, the scientific discoveries that followed, and the long shadow cast by this invisible enemy. The story of the 1918 flu pandemic is far from over, and its echoes continue to resonate in ways both familiar and surprising. As the world grappled with the fallout from the 1918 flu pandemic, it was clear this was no ordinary health crisis. It was more like an unwelcome houseguest who overstayed their welcome, ate all the snacks, and left the place in a mess. The socio-economic impact was profound, with countries reacting in a kaleidoscope of strategies that ranged from the inventive to the downright bizarre. Let's start with the economic toll, shall we? The pandemic hit at a time when the global economy was already limping from the war. Picture a boxer staggering from one too many punches. Industries were on the ropes, and the flu delivered the knockout blow. In the United States, the economy shrank by around 11% in 1918 and 1919, a downturn that makes the Great Depression look like a mild inconvenience. Factories were short-staffed, not because everyone was on a beach holiday, but because they were sick or 6 feet under. Agriculture took a particularly hard hit. With farmers incapacitated, harvests went uncollected, and food shortages loomed like a bad dream. The knock-on effect was inflation, with prices for basic commodities soaring faster than a politician's promise during an election campaign. In Britain, food prices rose by 25% in 1918 alone, making dinner time a luxury affair for many families. Meanwhile, in India, the death toll exceeded 12 million, exacerbating economic woes and leading to a severe drop in agricultural production. It was a vicious cycle. The flu weakened economies, and weakened economies struggled to combat the flu. But let's not get too gloomy. Amidst the chaos, communities found ways to cope, sometimes with gallows humor that could make a stand-up comedian blush. In the United States, jokes about the flu became part of the zeitgeist, with cartoons depicting the virus as a skulking villain. It was a case of laugh or cry, and many chose the former, using humor as a coping mechanism in an era before Netflix specials and meme culture. The pandemic also forced some innovative thinking. In New Zealand, for example, the government implemented a closed border policy, one of the earliest instances of a nation trying to shut the viral door before the horse bolted. Meanwhile, in South Africa, the community response was characterized by mutual aid societies that sprang up to support the sick and destitute. These grassroots efforts were the social media support networks of their day, without the hashtags, of course. Let's not forget the myth-busting moments. While the narrative of doom and gloom is compelling, it wasn't the whole story. Take the tale that cities were ghost towns with tumbleweeds rolling down Main Street. In reality, while some areas did experience significant disruption, many places saw a remarkable degree of resilience. In London, the underground kept running, albeit with fewer passengers, showing that even in a pandemic, some things never change, like the British resolve to keep calm and carry on. There's also the myth that the pandemic was universally catastrophic. While it was undoubtedly devastating, the impact varied wildly. In Japan, the death toll was relatively low, around 257,000, due partly to effective public health measures and a culture that already valued hygiene. This contrast highlights a crucial point. The pandemic's impact was as much about the response as the virus itself. It was like a global exam, and some countries passed with flying colors while others barely scraped by. And let's talk about gallows humor, because if there's one thing humans excel at, it's finding a chuckle in the darkest of times. In Philadelphia, amid the chaos, people joked about the flu's sudden onset and departure, quipping that it came in like a lamb and out like a lion, a nod to its unpredictable nature. It was a classic case of whistling past the graveyard, a reminder that humor can be a potent balm for societal wounds. But what about the role of women during the pandemic? Often overlooked, their contributions were nothing short of heroic. As men were drafted for war, women stepped into roles they traditionally hadn't filled, from factory jobs to healthcare positions. In Canada, the Women's Volunteer Reserve Corps was formed to help with everything from delivering food to caring for the sick. It was a moment that challenged gender norms and set the stage for future social change. The pandemic didn't just expose the cracks in society, it also revealed the untapped potential of half the population. As we dig deeper, it becomes apparent that the pandemic was a crucible of innovation and resilience. In Chicago, for example, the Public Health Department launched an ambitious campaign to educate the public about hygiene and disease prevention. They distributed leaflets, held public lectures, and even used motion pictures, a cutting-edge medium at the time, to spread the word. It was the 1918 version of a viral campaign, pun fully intended. Meanwhile, in Australia, the government took swift action by setting up a flu camp on North Head in Sydney to quarantine incoming passengers. It wasn't exactly Club Med, but it showed a level of proactive public health management that was ahead of its time. And when the flu threatened to cripple the postal service, the Australian Post Office introduced a system of staggered work hours to keep the mail moving. It was an early lesson in workplace flexibility, long before Zoom calls and digital nomads became the norm. The pandemic also left an indelible mark on public health infrastructure. In the US, the experience led to the establishment of the National Institute of Health in 1930, a direct response to the need for better disease research and management. It was a tacit acknowledgement that while germs don't respect borders, neither should solutions. Despite the challenges, there was a silver lining, if you squinted hard enough to see it. The flu pandemic forced societies to rethink their approach to health and hygiene, laying the groundwork for future advancements. It was a grim but valuable lesson in the interconnectedness of the modern world, underscoring the importance of cooperation and communication in tackling global challenges. So, as we turn the page on this chapter of history, we're left with a complex picture. The 1918 flu pandemic was a tapestry of tragedy and tenacity, a story of a world caught off guard but not entirely undone. It was a reminder that humanity, for all its flaws, has an uncanny ability to adapt, innovate, and find light even in the darkest of times. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the long-term effects of this global upheaval and the strides made in science and public health that emerged from its shadow. The lessons of 1918 echo into our present day, reminding us that while history may not repeat, it certainly rhymes. As the curtain lifted on the 20th century's medical drama, the world found itself starring in a plot twist that no one saw coming. The 1918 flu pandemic wasn't just a health crisis. It was a full-blown indictment of the medical community's understanding of infectious diseases. The scientific journey to decode and combat the flu was a roller coaster ride of breakthroughs and blunders, with more than a few screwball moments that would make even a sitcom writer blush. Let's start with the basics. Back then, the medical field was still figuring out the difference between bacteria and viruses. Think of it as the microbiological equivalent of mistaking a cat for a tiger. People knew germs were a thing, but the invisible world of viruses was still as mysterious as Bigfoot. Researchers were peering through microscopes like detectives with magnifying glasses, hoping to spot the viral villain. Spoiler alert, they wouldn't see the flu virus until the 1930, with the advent of the electron microscope. Until then, it was like trying to solve a crime without knowing who or what the culprit looked like. Now, hindsight is a beautiful thing, but at the time, the medical community was armed with little more than trial, error, and a dash of blind optimism. The cures for the flu were a mixed bag of well-intentioned guesses and downright quackery. Doctors prescribed everything from whiskey and quinine to more dubious remedies like inhaling formaldehyde fumes. Let's just say, if a time traveler from 1918 offered you medical advice, you'd be wise to politely decline. But amidst the chaos, there were glimmers of progress. Public health officials scrambled to impose quarantines and isolation measures, which were about as popular as a root canal without anesthesia. Crowded spaces like theaters and dance halls were shuttered, and the world saw an early version of social distancing, though back then it was less about flattening curves and more about avoiding becoming a statistic. The chaos of the flu's spread highlighted the need for organized public health responses, laying the groundwork for future institutions like the World Health Organization. Enter vaccines, the storied heroes of modern medicine. In 1918, the concept of a flu vaccine was still in its infancy, akin to a toddler taking its first steps. Scientists were busy trying to cultivate a vaccine using Pfeiffer's bacillus, erroneously believed to be the influenza agent. It wasn't until the 1930 that researchers identified the actual flu virus, leading to the development of the first effective influenza vaccine in the 1940. It took a couple of decades, but hey, these things take time. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was our immune defense against the flu. Meanwhile, the pandemic's toll spurred advances in medical research and infrastructure. In the United States, the National Research Council established a special committee to investigate the flu, marking a pivotal shift towards scientific inquiry over superstition. The push for better understanding and management of infectious diseases eventually led to the establishment of the National Institute of Health in 1930. It was as if the medical community had collectively decided that enough was enough, time to swap the shot-in-the-dark methods for actual shots in the arm. But let's not forget the blunders, because history is nothing if not a tapestry of human error. During the pandemic, some public health officials promoted wearing masks, but compliance was spotty at best. In San Francisco, the Anti-Mask League emerged, proving that even in 1918, there were folks who preferred their faces to breathe free, science be damned. The League's rallies were a curious mix of civic duty and reckless abandon, a a testament to the complex dance between individual freedom and collective responsibility. The flu also exposed the fragility and resilience of social structures. With so many doctors and nurses enlisted for war, the burden fell on those left behind, often untrained volunteers and medical students. It was baptism by fire, and the lessons learned were as invaluable as they were hard-won. The pandemic underscored the critical role of healthcare workers, a truth that still echoes today. The wisdom of hindsight, however, often gets lost in translation. Despite the strides made, the world would face future pandemics with a similar mix of preparedness and panic. The 1957 Asian flu and the 1968 Hong Kong flu were stark reminders that the lessons of the past are sometimes shelved alongside last season's fashion trends. Yet each crisis nudged the needle forward, incrementally improving public health responses and vaccine development. The 1918 flu pandemic was a crucible of change, forcing the medical community to confront its limitations and push the boundaries of what was possible. It was a period of intense learning, where every misstep was an opportunity for growth. In the grand narrative of history, it illustrated the delicate balance between human ingenuity and the forces of nature, a dance that continues to this day. As we delve deeper into the legacy of this global upheaval, the echoes of 1918 remind us that while history may not repeat itself verbatim, it certainly hums a familiar tune. The story of the 1918 flu pandemic is far from over, and its lessons continue to resonate in the modern world. Stay tuned as we explore the enduring impact and the scientific strides that emerged from the shadow of this invisible enemy. And so, as the echoes of 1918 reverberate through time, we find ourselves in a peculiar dance with history, where the steps are familiar, but the music is always changing. The long-term consequences of the 1918 flu pandemic are a testament to humanity's ability to adapt, albeit sometimes with all the grace of a toddler in roller skates. The aftermath wasn't just about recovering. It was about redefining our approach to health, society, and that ever-elusive concept of preparedness. Let's talk about the legacy of public health infrastructure. The 1918 pandemic was like a bad houseguest that leaves you no choice but to renovate. It exposed the glaring holes in healthcare systems worldwide, prompting countries to lay the groundwork for modern public health systems. In the United States, the Public Health Service Act of 1944 was a direct descendant of the pandemic's chaos, setting up a federal framework to tackle health crises. Across the pond in the UK, the National Health Service was born in 1948, an ambitious attempt to provide healthcare for all, free at the point of delivery. It was as if the flu had left a post-it note saying, "You might want to fix this. Love, history." Economically, the pandemic delivered a sucker punch at a time when the world was already down for the count. Countries were forced to rethink economic models and labor structures. It was a world where the old rules didn't apply, and new norms were as elusive as an honest politician. The global economy had contracted by about 6% in 1919, and the recovery was as uneven as a teenager's first attempt at shaving. Yet, it also sparked innovation. In the U.S., for example, the pandemic accelerated the shift towards mechanization in agriculture, as fewer hands meant more machines. It was the beginning of a technological revolution that would redefine the 20th century. Socially, the pandemic was a great leveler, shattering illusions of invulnerability. It didn't matter if you were a pauper or a prince. The flu played no favorites. This indiscriminate nature forced societies to confront issues of inequality and access to healthcare. In many places, the response to the pandemic laid bare the stark divides between rich and poor, prompting early discussions about socialized medicine. It was a wake-up call that, despite our best efforts, we are all passengers on the same planetary boat, just trying not to capsize. Now, let's draw some parallels to the present, because if there's one thing history loves, it's a sequel. Enter the COVID-19 pandemic, a modern-day reminder that while we've come a long way, some lessons are stubbornly resistant to being learned. Once again, we saw the scramble for resources, the political finger-pointing, and the public split between compliance and defiance. Mask debates, social distancing, and the race for a vaccine, all eerily reminiscent of 1918. Yet, with the benefit of a century's worth of medical advancements, We had tools that our ancestors could only dream of. Vaccines developed within a year, public health campaigns amplified by the digital age, and a global scientific community collaborating at a pace that would leave the 1918 researchers green with envy. But here's the kicker. Despite our technological prowess, the human element remains as unpredictable as ever. The politics of pandemics hasn't changed much, with leaders juggling public opinion like a clumsy circus act. The tension between individual freedoms and collective safety has ignited debates that echo those of 100 years ago. And let's not forget the misinformation, now turbocharged by the internet, turning what was once local folklore into global conspiracy theories faster than you can say viral. So, what can 1918 teach us if we actually pay attention? For starters, it reminds us that pandemics don't just end, they fade, leaving a trail of societal and economic shifts in their wake. They compel us to rethink systems, innovate solutions, and question our assumptions about health and society. The real legacy of the 1918 flu isn't just in the lives lost, but in the changes it spurred, changes that, if embraced, can make us more resilient to future threats. As we wrap up this historical jaunt, let's leave on a cheeky note. The 1918 flu, like a stubborn relative, forced its way into our collective consciousness and refused to leave without making a point. It taught us about the fragility of our systems and the strength of our adaptability. And while we may not always heed its lessons, it's comforting, or perhaps mildly terrifying, to know that history is always there, tapping us on the shoulder and whispering, "You might want to pay attention this time." In the end, the story of the 1918 flu pandemic is a reminder of our shared humanity and the ever-present dance between progress and peril. It's a tale that underscores the importance of learning from the past, even if we occasionally need a nudge or a pandemic to remember. So, as we navigate our own modern-day challenges, let's hope we can channel a bit of that 1918 resilience with a side of 21st century savvy. After all, history may not repeat, but it sure does rhyme, and sometimes it even sings a catchy tune. In the quaint city of Salzburg, where the hills are indeed alive with the sound of music, young Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was busy doing what most 5-year-olds weren't, composing music. While other kids were trying to figure out how not to trip over their own feet, Wolfgang was busy scribbling notes, creating tunes that would make seasoned musicians weep with envy. Born on January 27, 1756, this pint-sized prodigy was the son of Leopold Mozart, a man who had a head full of ambitious dreams and a chest full of sheet music. Leopold, a composer and musician himself, was the kind of dad who saw his kid's potential and thought, why not show him off to the world? And boy, did he. By the time Wolfgang was 6, he and his sister Nannerl were carted off on a grand European tour that would make even the most seasoned rock bands of today look like homebodies. This wasn't just a family road trip with some sightseeing. This was a full-blown spectacle. Now, let's talk specifics. The Mozart family kicked off their tour in 1762, and over the next 3 years, they covered roughly 500 miles. That's like walking from New York to Los Angeles, minus the Instagram stories. They rolled through the courts of Munich, Vienna, and Prague, dazzling kings, queens, and anyone else with a pulse. The young Mozart would play the clavier, improvise on the spot, or just generally blow people's powdered wigs off with his sheer talent. But we're not just dealing with cute parlor tricks here. At the tender age of 6, Wolfgang was already composing minuets. These weren't simple ditties either. These were sophisticated, well-structured pieces that made seasoned musicians scratch their heads and wonder if this kid had sold his soul to the devil. Spoiler alert, he hadn't. He was just that good. Leopold wasn't just a proud dad. He was a man on a mission. He knew the power of branding before it was cool. He meticulously documented Wolfgang's achievements and sent letters to anyone who would read them, detailing his son's genius and, of course, the family's financial needs. You see, being a musical wonderkind didn't come with a trust fund. The Mozarts needed patrons, and Leopold was all too aware of the economic realities of the time. Europe in the mid-18th century was a place where aristocrats held the purse strings and musicians had to play by their rules, literally. Wolfgang and his family were at the mercy of these patrons, performing whenever and wherever they were summoned. It was a world where creativity had to bow to the whims of those who could afford to indulge it. Let's not romanticize the European tour too much. Sure, Wolfgang got to perform in front of emperors and empresses, but he also had to deal with the less glamorous side of travel. Imagine long, bumpy carriage rides, no air conditioning, and food that probably made airplane meals look gourmet. And yet, despite these conditions, young Mozart continued to compose, perform, and charm his way through Europe. There's a rather humorous tale from a stop in London in 1764, where Wolfgang was presented with a musical theme by a musician named Carl Friedrich Abel. The little maestro was asked to improvise, and improvise he did. The result was nothing short of miraculous, leaving Abel and the audience utterly gobsmacked. This wasn't just a parlor trick. This was proof that Wolfgang had a mind that worked in ways others couldn't even fathom. But the tour wasn't just about Wolfgang showing off his musical prowess. It was also about networking, a word that makes most of us cringe today, but was just as crucial back then. The Mozarts rubbed elbows with the elite, formed relationships, and laid the groundwork for future engagements. It was a shrewd move by Leopold, who knew that a successful career in music wasn't just about talent. It was about who you knew and how well you could sell your story. As the tour progressed, so did Wolfgang's skills. He absorbed musical styles like a sponge, experimenting with different forms and incorporating them into his own compositions. By the time they reached Paris in 1764, Wolfgang had already composed his first symphony. Yes, you heard that right. At the age of 8, he was writing symphonies. Let that sink in for a moment. The tour finally wrapped up in 1766, and the Mozarts returned to Salzburg. But this wasn't the end of young Mozart's adventures. It was merely the beginning. He had conquered Europe, won over the aristocracy, and set the stage for a career that would eventually redefine classical music. Yet, as much as we'd love to imagine Wolfgang as a perpetually happy child prodigy, it's important to remember the pressures he faced. The relentless schedule, the high expectations, and the constant need to perform could have easily crushed someone less talented. But not Wolfgang. He thrived under pressure, turning every challenge into an opportunity to shine. And there you have it, the first chapter in the extraordinary life of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. A child prodigy, a musical genius, and a kid who probably made other parents wonder why their own children were still eating paste while he was composing symphonies. But as we'll see in the next part of our story, the path to greatness is never as smooth as a minuet, and for Mozart, the challenges were just beginning. Stay tuned, because things are about to get even more fascinating. As the wheels of their carriage rolled back into the familiar cobblestones of Salzburg, young Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was already a seasoned traveler, having ticked off more grand European cities than most of us have on our bucket lists. But now, at the ripe old age of 10, it was time for Mozart to settle into a life that was, at least temporarily, a little less jet-setting and a little more grounded. Spoiler alert, stability was not a word that would comfortably nestle into Mozart's vocabulary. Back in Salzburg, life was a whole different ballgame. Gone were the regal courts and the applause of aristocrats. In their place was the slightly more mundane reality of local gigs and the whims of the archbishopric. Yes, life in Salzburg was about as glamorous as a beige cardigan. But hey, even prodigies need a bit of downtime, right? This period of relative calm allowed Wolfgang to refine his skills, which meant composing more music, mastering the violin and the organ, and generally making the rest of us feel like underachievers. Enter Archbishop Hieronymus Collordo, the head honcho of Salzburg, who was about as easygoing as a porcupine in a balloon factory. The Archbishop had a very specific vision for his musicians. Keep it simple, keep it sacred, and for heaven's sake, keep it cheap. The word freelance today might conjure images of people working in coffee shops with laptops, but in the 18th century, it meant surviving on the capricious patronage of the aristocracy. Wolfgang had to toe the line between creativity and the Archbishop's budget constraints, a task as delicate as balancing a harpsichord on a tightrope. To say Mozart's teenage years were a whirlwind would be like saying Beethoven had a mild interest in sound. Between the ages of 13 and 17, Wolfgang composed his first operas, including La Finta Semplis in 1768, a piece that was anything but simple. He was a regular at the Salzburg court, but this was no dream job. Imagine working for a boss who thinks your award-winning symphony is just noise. Welcome to Wolfgang's world. Wolfgang's attempts to secure a stable position were met with more hurdles than an Olympic track event. The problem was twofold. The job market for musicians was tighter than a pair of 18th-century breeches, and Wolfgang's temperament was, let's say, not exactly corporate-friendly. His clashes with Archbishop Collordo were legendary. Picture a teenager rolling their eyes at every parental directive, and you get a taste of the tension. Collordo wanted Mozart to stick to the script, but Wolfgang was a man of improvisation, in more ways than one. The tension finally boiled over in 1777, when Wolfgang, tired of playing under Collordo's jurisdiction, decided to hit the road again. This time, however, it wasn't a family tour, but more of a job-hunting expedition with his mother, Anna Maria. The duo set off to Munich, then to Mannheim, and finally to Paris, each stop a new chapter in what was becoming a rather frustrating job search. Mozart was like a modern-day LinkedIn user, constantly networking and auditioning for positions that never quite materialized. In Paris, things went from bad to worse. Wolfgang's mother fell ill and tragically passed away in July 1778. It was a heartbreaking blow for the young composer, who had to navigate both personal grief and professional setbacks. Despite the tragedy, Mozart continued composing, creating symphonies and sonatas that captured the attention of Parisian audiences, but failed to secure him a permanent position. The City of Lights was proving to be more of a dim flicker for Wolfgang's career prospects. So, what was it like being a freelance musician in the 18th century? Imagine juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. Stability was non-existent, and security was a joke. Musicians were at the mercy of patrons whose interests could change with the season. Wolfgang had to adapt, constantly proving his worth while battling the economic realities of the time. It was a world where art and commerce clashed head-on, and survival required a blend of genius and sheer tenacity. Despite the setbacks, Mozart's travels were not in vain. Each city, each court, and each encounter added layers to his musical repertoire. From the Mannheim Orchestra, he absorbed the latest symphonic styles. In Paris, he imbibed the city's flair for dramatic operatic compositions. Every experience was a stepping stone, each setback a lesson learned. By 1779, Wolfgang was back in Salzburg, having secured a position as a court organist and concertmaster. It was a job that came with its own set of challenges, but at least it provided a semblance of financial security. The pay wasn't astounding, 150 florins a year, which might buy you a decent meal today, but was a modest sum even back then. Yet, despite the limitations, Wolfgang continued to compose, creating some of his most enduring works during this period. But the story doesn't end here, my friends. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was not one to be confined by the walls of Salzburg or the expectations of any patron. His journey was far from over, and the next chapter would see him take on new challenges, create masterpieces, and ultimately redefine what it meant to be a composer. So, stay tuned, because the intrigue and brilliance of Mozart's life are just getting started. Grab your popcorn and your powdered wigs. Things are about to get even more interesting. As Mozart's carriage rolled out of Salzburg, his sights were set on Vienna, the beating heart of European culture, and a city with more wigged aristocrats per capita than anywhere else. Vienna was the place where dreams were either made or crushed under the weight of powdered wigs and societal expectations. For Mozart, it was both a new beginning and a high-stakes gamble. Picture Vienna in the 1780, a bustling metropolis filled with composers, musicians, and enough intrigue to fill a dozen operas. It was a city that thrived on music, fashion, and gossip. Think of it as the 18th century version of Hollywood, but with fewer paparazzi and more horse-drawn carriages. Mozart arrived in 1781, ready to make his mark. He was no longer the child prodigy from Salzburg. He was a full-fledged composer looking to conquer the world, or at least Vienna. Now, let's talk romance, or rather, let's talk Constanze Weber, the woman who would become Mozart's partner in both life and music. Constanze was part of a musical family, which was great for conversations at the dinner table, but not so great when it came to settling down. You see, Wolfgang had initially been infatuated with Constance's sister, Aloysia, but as fate, or perhaps a bit of familial rivalry, would have it, Aloysia wasn't interested. Enter Constance, who not only caught Wolfgang's eye but also his heart. Their courtship was one for the ages, filled with passion, drama, and a fair amount of financial stress. In 1782, the two tied the knot, despite Wolfgang's father, Leopold, throwing about as much support behind the marriage as a wet noodle. You see, Leopold had his doubts about Constance, worried that she wasn't the ideal match for his son. But love prevailed, and the newlyweds set about their life together, which was a mix of musical triumphs and financial woes. Meanwhile, Mozart's career in Vienna was a roller coaster of successes and setbacks. In 1786, he premiered The Marriage of Figaro, a comic opera that was as subversive as it was brilliant. The opera took a cheeky jab at the aristocracy, daring to suggest that servants might have brains and desires of their own. This was a bold move in a society where hierarchy was as rigid as a corset. The opera was a hit, and Mozart was basking in the glow of success, albeit a glow that came with a few raised eyebrows from the upper crust. But while The Marriage of Figaro was a triumph, Mozart's financial situation was anything but. Despite his successes, Wolfgang found himself perpetually strapped for cash, a conundrum that would make even the most seasoned financial advisor throw up their hands in despair. How could a man so talented be so perpetually broke? The answer lies in a mix of economic realities and Mozart's penchant for living large. Vienna was expensive, and Wolfgang had a taste for the finer things in life. Add to that a growing family and a lack of steady income, and you begin to see the problem. Now, let's debunk a myth: Mozart's mysterious rivalries. The most famous of these is, of course, the alleged feud with Antonio Salieri, immortalized in plays and movies as a tale of envy and betrayal. But here's the scoop. While Salieri and Mozart were indeed contemporaries, the idea of a bitter rivalry is more fiction than fact. The two composers had a professional relationship that was competitive, sure, but also respectful. They even collaborated on at least one occasion. So while the story of a deadly rivalry makes for great drama, the reality is far less sinister. What about Mozart's quirks and eccentricities, you ask? Well, let's just say Wolfgang was a man of many talents and a few odd habits. He had a penchant for scatological humor, which is a fancy way of saying he found bodily functions endlessly amusing. This wasn't just an occasional chuckle at a fart joke. It was a full-on appreciation for the scatological. Letters to his family are peppered with jokes that would make a 12-year-old blush. But hey, even geniuses need their quirks, right? Musically, Mozart was a sponge, absorbing influences from every corner of Europe. His compositions were a melting pot of styles, and he had an uncanny ability to blend them into something entirely his own. In Vienna, he was at the center of the action, collaborating with other musicians, attending salons, and constantly refining his craft. His symphonies, concertos, and operas from this period are some of the most celebrated works in classical music, each one a testament to his genius. Yet, for all his brilliance, Mozart's life in Vienna was a constant balancing act. He had to navigate a world where patronage was key, and where a change in political winds could mean the difference between feast and famine. Despite his acclaim, Mozart was often at the mercy of the aristocracy, relying on commissions and concerts to make ends meet. It was a precarious existence, and one that Mozart managed with a mix of charm, wit, and sheer determination. As the 1780s drew to a close, Wolfgang's fortunes were as unpredictable as ever. He experienced both the thrill of success and the sting of financial hardship, a duality that defined much of his later life. But through it all, he continued to compose, creating music that would endure long after his time. His operas, symphonies, and chamber works are a testament to his genius, each one a reminder of the indelible mark he left on the world. And so, as we leave Mozart in Vienna, poised on the brink of yet more challenges and triumphs, we find ourselves drawn further into his world, a world of music, passion, and the perpetual struggle between creativity and commerce. The story of Mozart is far from over, and as we continue to explore his life, we'll uncover even more layers of this extraordinary composer. So, stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. As we delve into the next chapter of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's life, we find ourselves in the late 1780, a time when the maestro was simultaneously at the peak of his creative powers and the edge of a financial cliff. You see, Mozart's later years were a paradoxical blend of triumph and turmoil, the kind of dramatic tension that would make even the most hardened soap opera writer weep with envy. Let's kick things off with one of his crowning achievements, Don Giovanni, premiered in 1787 in Prague. This opera was a bold, daring masterpiece that threw the rulebook out the window like an old pair of breeches. Forget the tame areas of yore. This was a raw and riveting exploration of human excess and consequence. The character of Don Giovanni is a swaggering aristocrat whose hedonistic lifestyle is about as sustainable as a chocolate teapot. The opera's mix of comedy and tragedy kept audiences on the edge of their seats and kept Mozart in the good graces of his patrons, at least for the moment. Prague adored him, but back in Vienna, Mozart's financial situation was shakier than a souffle in an earthquake. Despite his fame and the accolades rolling in like a series of crescendoing symphonies, money seemed to slip through his fingers faster than a Quicksilver allegro. And no, it wasn't just because he had a penchant for fancy waistcoats and lavish parties. The truth is, Vienna in the 1780 was an economic minefield. The cost of living was spiraling upwards, and patronage was as reliable as a Viennese summer, beautiful one minute, stormy the next. Mozart's need for income led him to take on commissions, teaching gigs, and even the odd loan from friends. He was like a master juggler, trying to keep multiple balls in the air while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. But in a city where the currency of the realm was connections, Mozart was often left to fend for himself. His letters from this period paint a picture not just of a composer, but of a man who was constantly on the hustle, perpetually one step ahead of the creditors. Then, in 1791, came The Magic Flute, a work that seemed to encapsulate everything Mozart had been striving for. Premiered just weeks before his death, this opera was a fantastical blend of Enlightenment ideals and Masonic symbolism, wrapped in a package as entertaining as it was thought-provoking. It was like a Disney movie with a philosophical twist, whimsical on the surface, but with layers of depth lurking beneath. But while The Magic Flute was a hit, Mozart's personal life was anything but harmonious. His health was declining, and his financial woes were mounting like a crescendo that never quite resolved. The reality of his situation was grim. Debts piled up faster than he could count, and his once loyal patrons were becoming increasingly scarce. It was as if Vienna had turned its back on its prodigal son, leaving him to face the music on his own. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, Mozart's death at the age of 35. Over the years, this has been the subject of more conspiracy theories than a UFO sighting at Roswell. Was he poisoned by a jealous rival? Did Freemasons have a hand in it? Was it a curse from the heavens for his irreverent humor? The truth, dear listeners, is far less sensational. Modern historians believe that Mozart likely succumbed to an illness, possibly rheumatic fever or a streptococcal infection, both common scourges of the era. But saying he died of a throat infection just doesn't have the same Hollywood ring to it, does it? In the days leading up to his death, Mozart was reportedly working feverishly on his Requiem, a piece shrouded in its own veil of mystery. Commissioned by a stranger, this Mass for the Dead seemed an eerie foreshadowing of his own impending doom. But the romantic notion of Mozart composing his own funeral music is, alas, just that, a notion. He left the piece unfinished, a poignant reminder of his brilliance and the fragility of life itself. Mozart's death was a tragedy, not just for his family, but for the musical world at large. His funeral was a modest affair, attended by a small group of friends and admirers. Man who had once dazzled the courts of Europe was laid to rest in an unmarked grave, a common practice at the time, though one that seems heartbreakingly unworthy of such a genius. So, what do we make of Mozart's later years? They were a testament to his enduring spirit, his unyielding dedication to his craft, and his indomitable will to create in the face of adversity. His music continues to resonate, a timeless tribute to a man who, despite all obstacles, never ceased to push the boundaries of what was possible. As we leave Mozart on the brink of his final chapter, we are left with a sense of awe and admiration for a life lived with passion and purpose. His legacy is a symphony of innovation and inspiration, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light of creativity can shine through. Stay tuned, because while Mozart's journey may have ended, his story is far from over. There's more to uncover, more to explore, and more to celebrate in the life of this extraordinary composer. As we close the curtain on Mozart's life, it's time to consider the encore, his legacy. Despite leaving us at the tender age of 35, Mozart managed to compose over 600 works. That's right, more than 600, a staggering number, especially when you consider that most of us struggle to compose a coherent grocery list. His music, spanning symphonies, concertos, chamber music, and operas, continues to echo through concert halls and Spotify playlists alike, proving that genius knows no expiration date. Let's start by tackling the myths that swirl around Mozart like a mysterious fog. The image of a tortured genius, laboring away in solitude, is as romantic as it is inaccurate. While it's true that Mozart faced financial woes and societal pressures, he was hardly the isolated, misunderstood loner that some narratives paint. In reality, he was an active participant in the musical and cultural life of his time, constantly engaging with the world around him and drawing inspiration from it. His compositions were not the product of an ivory tower, but of a man who was very much in tune with his environment. And what of his supposed rivalries? The Mozart-Salieri feud is the historical equivalent of a juicy tabloid story, great for drama, but not quite aligned with the facts. Sure, there was competition, as there always is in any field where the stakes are high. But the idea that Salieri conspired to poison Mozart is more fiction than fact, a product of later dramatizations rather than contemporary reality. The truth is, both composers were esteemed in their own rights, and their professional interactions were largely cordial. Now, onto the enduring appeal of Mozart's music. Why does it resonate so profoundly, even centuries after the ink dried on his scores? The answer lies in its universal qualities, the emotional depth, the structural brilliance, and the melodic inventiveness. Take, for instance, his Symphony No. 40 in G minor. It's a work that captures the turbulence of the human soul with such clarity that it feels as relevant today as it did in 1788. Or consider the Magic Flute, with its blend of fantasy and philosophical inquiry, a narrative that invites both children and adults to explore deeper meanings. Mozart's influence extends far beyond the boundaries of classical music. His work laid the foundation for future generations of composers, from Beethoven to Brahms. Beethoven, in particular, was profoundly impacted by Mozart's compositions. The young Ludwig even sought lessons with Mozart in Vienna, though their time together was regrettably brief. The seeds planted during those encounters, however, would blossom into the rich, complex symphonies that defined Beethoven's career. But Mozart's genius wasn't just in the notes he wrote. It was in his ability to connect with the audiences of his time and beyond. He was a master of empathy, crafting music that spoke to the human condition with an authenticity that transcends cultural and temporal boundaries. This is why his music remains a staple in films, commercials, and yes, even those elevator playlists we all secretly enjoy. His melodies have a way of sneaking into our consciousness, making us feel something profound, even if only for a moment. Economically, Mozart's life serves as a cautionary tale of the artist's plight. Despite his immense talent, he struggled with financial stability, a stark reminder that genius does not always equate to wealth. In 18th-century Vienna, musicians were at the mercy of patrons whose interests could be as fickle as the fashions of the day. Mozart's reliance on commissions and performances meant that his income was precarious, subject to the whims of societal tastes and economic shifts. Yet, in the face of these challenges, Mozart's resilience was nothing short of remarkable. His ability to adapt, to innovate, and to persevere in the face of adversity is a testament to his character. He navigated the complex web of patronage with a combination of charm and determination, leaving behind a body of work that continues to inspire musicians and listeners alike. It's easy to romanticize the figure of Mozart, a prodigy who dazzled courts, a composer who defied convention, a man who lived his life with a passion that burned brightly until the very end. But beneath the legend lies a human story, one of ambition, struggle, and an unwavering commitment to his art. Mozart was, in many ways, an everyman, facing the same challenges and uncertainties that we all encounter. Yet, his response was extraordinary, transforming personal and professional trials into timeless art. As we wrap up our exploration of Mozart's life, let's remember him not just as a musical genius, but as a pioneer who dared to push the boundaries of what was possible. His legacy is a reminder that creativity knows no limits, that innovation thrives in the face of adversity, and that the power of art lies in its ability to transcend the mundane, touching the very essence of what it means to be human. So, next time you find yourself humming a Mozart melody, whether it's a grand symphony or a playful sonata, remember the man behind the music, a composer who, despite the odds, left an indelible mark on the world. His story is a symphony in itself, a testament to the enduring power of creativity and the timeless beauty of music. And with that, dear friends, we conclude our journey through the life of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, a tale of genius, resilience, and an everlasting legacy that continues to inspire us all.